The alarm clock split the silence at exactly 6:30, its digital chirp cutting through the gray November light, filtering through bedroom curtains that hadn't been replaced in 4 years. Evan Carter's hand found the button before his eyes opened. Muscle memory perfected through 1,000 identical mornings, each one a carbon copy of the last. Each one carrying the same invisible pressure that settled against his chest before his feet even touched the cold hardwood floor. He lay still for 7 seconds, counting them the way he always did, giving himself that small window to remember who he was, for the day demanded he become something else entirely. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The ritual had started sometime during the first year after Sarah left a way of anchoring himself to reality before the weight of responsibility descended. He didn't know why 7 seconds. It just felt right. Long enough to breathe, short enough to prevent the darker thoughts from taking root. The ceiling above him held a water stain shaped vaguely like the state of Ohio, and he had memorized every ridge and discoloration during countless sleepless nights, countless early mornings when he woke before the alarm and simply waited. The stain had appeared 3 winters ago after a particularly brutal ice storm knocked a branch onto the roof. He'd patched the leak himself, watching YouTube tutorials at 2 in the morning while Lily slept because calling a professional cost money he didn't have, and admitting he needed help felt like admitting he was failing at everything else too. The stain remained as a reminder of the storm, of the sleepless night, of the particular loneliness of being the only adult in a house that creaked and groaned with sounds he had to investigate alone. Evan's body carried an exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical labor, a bone-deep weariness that no amount of rest could cure. It was the kind of tiredness that settled into a person when they spent years carrying weight that was never meant for one set of shoulders alone. The kind that accumulated in layers each day, adding another thin film of fatigue until the accumulation became indistinguishable from the person themselves. He pushed himself upright and swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, bare feet meeting the cold hardwood floor with a soft thud. The room was sparse functional, containing only what was necessary and nothing more. A dresser against the far wall, its surface empty except for a single-frame photograph of turned face down, because looking at it required more courage than he possessed most days. A closet door slightly ajar, revealing the same rotation of work shirts and jeans he'd worn for years. A nightstand holding a lamp, a phone charger, and a glass of water he never remembered to drink. The bedroom had been different once. There had been pictures on the walls, a vase of flowers on the dresser that Sarah refreshed every week, throw pillows on the bed that served no practical purpose, but made the space feel intentional, curated, loved. All of that had disappeared gradually in the months after she left, removed piece by piece as Evan stripped away everything that reminded him of a life that no longer existed. What remained was functional, sterile, a place to sleep, nothing more. The hallway stretched before him as he moved toward the bathroom, passing Lily's door, with the hand-painted wooden letters spelling her name. Each letter was a different color because she had insisted on choosing them herself when she was 4, standing in the craft store aisle with the serious concentration of someone making a decision of cosmic importance. L in purple, her favorite color. I in yellow because it looked like sunshine. L in blue because the ocean. Y in green because trees. He could hear her soft breathing through the thin walls, the peaceful rhythm of a child still lost in dreams, unaware that the world beyond her bedroom door had edges sharper than she had yet encountered. Evan paused for a moment outside her door, as he did every morning, listening to that breathing, confirming that she was real, that she was here, that she hadn't disappeared in the night the way her mother had. The fear was irrational. He knew that. Lily was 7 years old, had never shown any inclination to vanish, loved her bed and her stuffed rabbit in the security of routine. But the fear persisted anyway, a remnant of the trauma that had rewired his brain 4 years ago, teaching him that the people you loved most could leave without warning, without explanation, without even the courtesy of goodbye. Satisfied by the sound of her breathing, Evan continued to the bathroom. Cold water splashed against his face, shocking his system into reluctant alertness. The mirror showed him a man he sometimes didn't recognize, someone whose eyes had grown duller with each passing year, whose jaw carried permanent tension that massage couldn't release and sleep couldn't ease. 34 years old and already wearing the face of someone who had lived twice that long. Every line and shadow was a testament to battles fought in silence, victories claimed without celebration, defeats absorbed without complaint. The gray at his temples had appeared in the first year after Sarah left, spreading slowly, marking the passage of time in a way that made him feel ancient despite his relatively young age. He dried his face with a towel that needed washing and made his way downstairs, each step creaking in familiar patterns that he'd learned to navigate in darkness during years of midnight feedings and nightmare comforting. The third step from the bottom was the loudest, and he'd developed an automatic habit of skipping it entirely. A muscle memory from the countless times he'd crept down in the middle of the night to warm a bottle or retrieve a forgotten stuffed animal without waking the sleeping child upstairs. The kitchen waited at the bottom, cold and quiet, the appliances gleaming dully in the early morning light that crept through windows streaked with the remnants of last week's rain. The room was small but functional, with laminate countertops that had seen better decades and cabinets that didn't quite close properly. Evan had meant to fix them for years, had watched tutorials on cabinet adjustment, had even bought the necessary tools. They sat unused in the garage, another item on the endless list of things he meant to do, but never found the energy to accomplish. Before starting breakfast, he checked his laptop on the kitchen counter, a ritual that had become as automatic as brushing his teeth. 3 client emails had arrived overnight, all requesting revisions on the logo designs he'd submitted last week. As a freelance graphic designer, he'd built his business around the flexibility that single parenthood demanded. He could work while Lily was at school, could take calls during her activities, could structure his days around her needs rather than the demands of a corporate office. The first email was from a dental practice in Cincinnati that wanted the tooth in their logo to look friendlier but also more professional, but also more approachable, but also more serious. Evan had learned to translate these contradictory requests into something workable, to read between the lines and deliver what clients actually wanted rather than what they said they wanted. The second email was from a startup founder who had changed his mind about the color palette for the 4th time in 2 weeks. Blue was too corporate, green was too environmental, red was too aggressive, orange was too playful. Evan suspected the man would eventually circle back to blue, the original choice, after exhausting every other option. The third email was from his most reliable client, a regional chain of hardware stores that had been using his services for 3 years. They needed new seasonal graphics for their winter campaign with a reasonable deadline and a fair budget. These were the clients that kept his business afloat, the steady work that allowed him to tolerate the difficult ones. It wasn't the career he'd imagined when he graduated from design school 12 years ago, full of ambition and plans for agency work in Chicago or New York. He dreamed of creating campaigns for major brands, of seeing his work on billboards and television, of building a portfolio that would make his professors proud. Instead, he designed logos for dentists and flyers for hardware stores from a laptop in his kitchen, wearing the same sweatpants he'd worn yesterday, trying not to wake his daughter before her alarm went off. But the work paid the mortgage on this small house in suburban Columbus, kept food on the table, and most importantly, allowed him to be the parent Lily needed. The parent she had no choice but to rely on, since the other one had decided that motherhood was optional, that family was a commitment she could abandon with a text message and a disappearing act. Evan closed the laptop and began the choreography of breakfast preparation, pulling eggs and bread from the refrigerator, setting butter on the counter to soften. The movements were automatic, honed through thousands of repetitions, a dance he could perform in his sleep, and often did his body going through the motions, while his mind wandered elsewhere. Outside, the neighborhood was beginning to stir. Car engines turned over in driveways, garage doors rumbled open, the sounds of other lives beginning their own daily cycles. Evan listened to these noises the way a prisoner might listen to guards making rounds, aware of the rhythm, but never truly part of it, always separated by barriers both visible and invisible. The Hendersons next door had a morning routine he'd memorized through years of incidental observation. Mr. Henderson left for work at exactly 6:45, his sedan backing out of the driveway with the precision of someone who had made the same journey 10,000 times. Mrs. Henderson followed 20 minutes later, dropping their 2 children at school before continuing to her job at the insurance company downtown. On weekends, they had barbecues and invited neighbors. Though the invitations to Evan had gradually stopped coming after he declined the first several, uncomfortable with the social expectations, the inevitable questions about his situation, the pitying looks from couples who couldn't imagine raising a child alone. Across the street, the Williamses were newer to the neighborhood, a young couple with a baby who cried through the night with a persistence that Evan remembered from Lily's infancy. He'd considered going over offering advice or support, the kind of thing neighbors did in television shows and movies. But he hadn't because he didn't know how to start that conversation, didn't know how to explain that he understood sleepless nights and the particular desperation of early parenthood, didn't know how to be the kind of person who knocked on doors and offered help. The pan heated on the stove while he cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking them with a fork that had seen better decades. The fork had belonged to his grandmother, one of the few things he'd kept after his parents died, a tangible connection to a past that sometimes felt like it had belonged to someone else. He'd been 22 when they died, a junior in college, still young enough to believe that tragedy was something that happened to other people. A drunk driver, a Tuesday evening, a phone call from a hospital in Indiana where they'd been visiting friends. The details had faded over the years, softened by time, and overwhelmed by subsequent losses. But the fork remained solid and real, a reminder that he had once been someone's son, that he had once belonged to a family that wasn't defined by absence. He thought about the day ahead as he cooked the hours stretching before him with their familiar mixture of obligation and emptiness. Client work until 2:30 when he'd drive to pick up Lily from school. Homework help, dinner, the bedtime routine that had become as ritualized as a religious ceremony. And then the evening hours, the quiet after Lily fell asleep, when the house felt largest and loneliest, when the absence of another adult presence pressed against him like something physical. He used to drink during those hours, not heavily, not in a way that anyone would have called problematic, but enough to take the edge off, to blur the sharp corners of his loneliness into something more manageable. A glass of whiskey while he worked on projects. A beer while he watched television he didn't care about. The habit had crept up on him, gradually filling the spaces that used to be occupied by conversation, by companionship, by the simple comfort of sharing a room with someone who wanted to be there. He'd stopped 18 months ago after a session with Dr. Matthews where he had admitted that the drinking wasn't recreational anymore, that it had become a coping mechanism, a way of numbing himself to feelings he didn't know how to process. The therapist hadn't lectured him, hadn't used words like alcoholism or addiction. She'd simply asked what the drinking was replacing, what need it was filling, and whether there might be healthier ways to meet that need. He hadn't found healthier ways yet. He just stopped drinking and learned to sit with the discomfort, to let the evening hours be as difficult as they actually were, to stop pretending that he was fine, when fine was the last thing he felt. The eggs sizzled in the pan as he pushed them around with a spatula, watching them transform from liquid to solid, a simple change that somehow felt significant this morning in ways he couldn't articulate. Everything felt slightly off-kilter, as though the universe had shifted by a degree while he slept and left him scrambling to find his footing in a world that looked the same but felt inexplicably different. Maybe it was the milestone. Today marked exactly 6 months since his final session with Dr. Matthews, 6 months since he'd been discharged from the mental health program with instructions to continue his medication practice, his coping strategies, and reach out if things got worse. He hadn't reached out. Things hadn't gotten worse exactly. They just hadn't gotten better either. He'd maintained, survived, kept showing up for Lily and for his clients and for the basic demands of existence without collapsing entirely. That was something, wasn't it? That had to count for something. Footsteps on the stairs announced Lily's arrival before she appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her hair was a tangled mess of brown waves that would require patient brushing, her eyes still heavy with sleep, her favorite stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand. The rabbit's name was Mr. Flopsy, a name Lily had bestowed at age 3, with the unshakable certainty of someone making an obvious observation rather than a creative choice. Mr. Flopsy had been through a lot over the past 4 years. He'd lost an eye during a washing machine incident and gained a replacement button eye that didn't quite match. His stuffing had migrated over time, leaving him lumpy in some places and flat in others. One ear had been resewn so many times that it was more thread than original fabric. But Lily refused to consider retirement for her companion, insisted that he was perfect, that his imperfections made him special. Evan sometimes wondered if she was talking about the rabbit or about herself, about him, about their cobbled-together family of 2. Lily stood into the doorway for a moment, blinking at the light, processing the reality of morning, before padding across the linoleum floor toward him in bare feet that made soft slapping sounds against the cool surface. She climbed onto her usual chair at the kitchen table, pulling her knees up to her chest and wrapping her arms around them, making herself as small as possible in the way children do when they're not quite ready to face the bigness of the day. Mr. Flopsy sat propped against the salt shaker, his button eyes staring blankly at the wall, his stitched smile offering the same comfort it had provided since Evan bought him for Lily's third birthday. That had been the first birthday after Sarah left, and Evan had overcompensated wildly buying too many presents, planning too elaborate a party, trying to fill the absence with stuff and activity. Lily had ignored most of the expensive toys and latched onto the $5 rabbit from the grocery store impulse bin. Kids knew things. They saw through the desperate efforts of adults to manufacture happiness, cut straight to the simple comforts that actually mattered. "Morning, sweetheart," Evan said, the words emerging automatically, the first he'd spoken aloud since waking. "Morning, Daddy." Lily's voice was scratchy with sleep, still carrying the rough edges of whatever dreams she'd been pulled from. Evan slid the eggs onto a plate and brought it to her, along with a fork and a glass of orange juice that he'd poured while she was settling into her chair. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers gentle against her warm cheek, and felt the familiar surge of love that always accompanied these small moments, a love so fierce it sometimes frightened him with its intensity. This was why he got up every morning. This was why he answered emails from difficult clients and fixed leaky roofs and sat through the difficult evening hours without the numbing comfort of alcohol. This small person with her tangled hair and her button-eyed rabbit, this was everything. "I had a dream about clouds," Lily announced, picking up her fork and studying her eggs with the critical eye of a restaurant reviewer. "They were pink and they tasted like cotton candy, and I could bounce on them like trampolines." "That sounds like a pretty good dream." It was, and there was a pawing, a big fluffy one he could flapwing, a flying dog. All dogs can fly in Dream World. Didn't you know that? I did not know that. Lily nodded with the confidence of someone sharing established scientific fact. It's true, they just hide it in real life because they don't want people to know. Evan smiled, the expression feeling unfamiliar on his face, a reminder of how rarely he found reasons to smile these days. Lily had that effect on him, could pierce through his fog with her absurd observations and her earnest certainty about impossible things. She stabbed at her eggs with more enthusiasm than skill, sending a small piece skittering across the table. She didn't notice or didn't care, already launching into another tale about the dream clouds and the flying dog and a princess who lived in a castle made entirely of cheese. Her voice filled the kitchen with sound, chasing away the silence that had accumulated during the night, and Evan let it wash over him like medicine, like something he desperately needed, but hadn't known he was missing. He took his own seat across from her and ate his own breakfast, content to listen to, let her words fill the spaces between them. The morning routine continued in its prescribed fashion after breakfast, moving from the kitchen to the bathroom to the eternal struggle with Lily's hair. Evan sat her on the closed toilet lid and worked through the snarls with a wide-toothed comb, apologizing each time she winced, promising to be gentler, even as the comb caught on another stubborn knot. Lily's hair was like her mother's, thick and wavy and prone to tangles that seemed to develop overnight, specifically to test his patience. Sarah had known how to handle it, had some technique involving leave-in conditioner and patience that Evan had never learned. He'd watched her do it hundreds of times during their marriage, but he'd never paid close enough attention, never imagined he'd need to know. Now he did the best he could, which wasn't very good, which was the story of his life as a single parent. Doing his best, falling short, trying again the next day. "Daddy, can we get a show?" Lily asked the question, arriving out of nowhere the way her questions often did, apropos of nothing and everything simultaneously. Evan separated a section of hair and began working on it with renewed concentration. "We've talked about this, Lily. Dogs are a lot of responsibility. I would take care of it. I would feed it and walk it and love it forever and ever. I know you would try, sweetheart. But dogs need a lot of attention, and with school and my work." He trailed off, unwilling to complete the sentence, unwilling to explain that the real reason was simpler and sadder than logistics. He couldn't bear the thought of bringing something else into their lives that might eventually leave another presence to grow attached to another potential source of loss. The house already felt haunted by absences, and adding more felt like tempting a fate that had already proven cruel. But I'd be so good at it, Lily pressed. I'd take it for walks every single day, even when it's raining, even when it's snowing, even when there's a tornado. I don't think anyone should be walking dogs during a tornado. Tornado dogs are very brave. They don't mind. I didn't know tornado dogs were a thing. They're a special breed, like flying dogs but for storms. Evan finished working through a particularly stubborn knot, trying not to pull too hard. Where do you learn about all these special dog breeds? Dream School. Ah, of course, Dream School. Lily accepted his non-answer about the dog with the resigned patience of a child who had learned that some questions didn't have satisfying conclusions. She'd asked about the dog at least once a week for the past year, adjusting her arguments, refining her pitches, approaching the topic from different angles, like a tiny lawyer building a case. Each time, Evan found a reason to say not yet, which they both knew meant no. He felt guilty about it. She was lonely, he knew that. An only child in a single-parent household with no siblings to play with, and a father who was often distracted by work or weighed down by feelings he tried to hide. A dog would give her companionship, would teach her responsibility, would fill the house with the kind of chaos that might chase away some of the quiet. But he wasn't ready, might never be ready. And so the dog remained a theoretical creature existing only in Lily's dreams, alongside flying dogs and tornado dogs and all the other impossible animals that populated her imagination. The conversation shifted to other topics as he finished her hair and helped her into her school clothes. Pink shirt with a rainbow on the front, blue jeans with embroidered flowers on the pockets, white sneakers that were already scuffed despite being purchased just 2 months ago. She was growing so fast, her limbs lengthening seemingly overnight, her face losing the roundness of toddlerhood and developing the angles that would eventually become her adult features. He could see Sarah in her, sometimes in the shape of her eyes, in the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, in her stubbornness about things that mattered to her. He could see himself, too, in her sense of humor and her tendency toward introversion, in the way she studied new situations carefully before engaging. She was a mix of both of them, a living reminder that the relationship had been real, once had produced something lasting and precious even as it crumbled. The backpack sat waiting by the front door, packed the night before, with completed homework and permission slips in the lunch Evan had assembled after Lily went to bed. He checked the contents one final time while she pulled on her jacket, counting the items, like a ritual, ensuring nothing was forgotten or misplaced. Sandwich peanut butter and jelly, with the crusts cut off because Lily had declared crusts an insult to bread. Apples sliced into wedges because she'd somehow decided that whole apples were unacceptable, but apple slices were delicious, a distinction that made no logical sense but was non-negotiable in her 7-year-old worldview. Crackers, the fish-shaped kind that she'd been eating since toddlerhood. Juice box, grape-flavored. Napkin because she was a messy eater and would need it. And a small note he'd written on a piece of scrap paper that simply read, "You are loved," with a lopsided heart drawn beside it. He'd started writing the notes during the first year after Sarah left, a way of maintaining connection during the school hours when they were apart. Lily had never mentioned them, and for a long time he'd wondered if she even read them, if they went straight into the trash along with the lunch detritus. Then one day when he was cleaning her room, he'd found a shoebox under her bed filled with every note he'd ever written, organized chronologically, stored with the care of treasures. He'd cried that night after she went to sleep, overwhelmed by the evidence of how much these small gestures mattered, how much she needed to be reminded that she was loved. He'd never stopped writing them. Never would. They walked to the truck, together, Lily's hand in his, her fingers small and warm, and trusting in a way that never failed to move him. The morning air was cool, carrying the promise of winter, but not yet delivering on it, and Lily's breath formed tiny clouds as she chattered about her plans for recess and the spelling test she was confident she would ace. "I studied all the words," she informed him, "even the hard ones, even because." Because is a tricky one. B-E-C-A-U-S-E. It doesn't sound the way it looks. A lot of English words are like that. English is weird. Can't argue with that. The truck was a Ford F-150 that had seen better years, a decade old, with rust spots on the wheel wells and a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot incident Evan preferred not to discuss. It had been his father's truck, once inherited after the accident, along with the fork and a handful of other items that the estate lawyer had deemed valuable enough to keep. Evan had held on to it longer than made financial sense, paying for repairs that cost more than the vehicle was worth, unable to let go of this last tangible connection to a man who had taught him to drive in this very truck, patient and encouraging on country roads that seemed to stretch forever. The drive to school took 12 minutes along roads he knew by heart, past houses where families lived, lives he could only imagine from the outside. The Petersons on Maple Street, with their immaculate lawn and their 3 children and their annual Christmas display that drew visitors from neighboring towns. The Garcias on Oak Avenue, who'd hosted the block party last summer that Evan had attended briefly uncomfortably before retreating to the safety of his own home. The old Victorian on the corner of Main and 3rd that had been for sale for 2 years, its paint peeling its windows dark, a reminder that even houses could be abandoned. He drove past yards where children's toys lay scattered like evidence of joy, past a small park, where Lily had taken her first steps years ago on grass that was now brown with November's dying grip. He drove with the radio off, preferring the sound of his daughter's voice to anything the morning show hosts might offer, storing away her words like treasures he could retrieve later when the loneliness became too much. Lily talked about her best friend Emma, who had a little brother who was basically a disaster but kind of cute. She talked about her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who was nice but gives too much homework. She talked about a boy named Marcus, who brought a lizard to school and let Lily hold it, even though lizards were kind of creepy, but also cool. Evan listened and nodded and made appropriate sounds of encouragement, all while the familiar ache settled into his chest. He loved these moments, dreaded them too, because they were a reminder of what Lily deserved of the childhood she should have had with 2 parents who shared the labor and the joy of the normal she'd been denied through no fault of her own. The school appeared ahead, a low brick building surrounded by a fence painted cheerful colors that couldn't quite mask the institutional nature of the structure. Madison Elementary, home of the Wildcats, serving approximately 400 students from kindergarten through 5th grade. Lily had been attending since she was 5, had grown up in these halls, had made friends and enemies, and the complicated relationships between that children navigated with surprising sophistication. Cars lined up in the drop-off lane, parents waving goodbye to children who were already forgetting their existence before they reached the front doors. Evan pulled into the queue and waited his turn, watching the other vehicles inch forward, watching the other parents perform their own versions of letting go. Most were mothers. That was still the norm, even in this era of supposed equality, even in a world where men were theoretically expected to share child-rearing duties. The fathers were there, but fewer, often looking slightly out of place, slightly uncertain, as though they were visitors in a world that hadn't fully made room for them. Evan had stopped feeling like a visitor somewhere around the 2nd year of doing this alone. He'd become a regular, a familiar face, someone the teachers and administrators recognized and greeted by name. But he still caught the occasional curious glance, the unspoken question about where the mother was, the assumptions that he was divorced or widowed or somehow temporarily filling in for the real parent. He'd stopped explaining. It was easier to let people believe whatever they wanted to believe. When they reached the drop-off point, Lily unbuckled her seatbelt and gathered her backpack, pausing with her hand on the door handle. She turned back to look at him, her eyes suddenly serious, older than they should have been in ways that made his heart ache. "Daddy, are you going to be okay today?" she asked. The question caught him off guard, exposed him in a way he hadn't anticipated. He forced his face into a smile that felt hollow even as he produced it, hoping she couldn't see the cracks in his armor. "Of course, sweetheart. Why wouldn't I be?" Lily studied him for a moment longer, her gaze penetrating in ways that made him uncomfortable. She saw too much, this child, understood too much, had learned to read his moods with the precision of a survival skill, which was exactly what it was for a child who'd grown up without a parent who struggled, who had good days and bad days, who sometimes needed to be alone with feelings that were too big to share. "You just look tired, more tired than usual." "I'm fine, Lily, I promise." She seemed to accept this, or at least chose not to push further. She leaned across the console to kiss his cheek, a quick press of lips that carried more comfort than she could possibly know, before pushing open the door and hopping out. Her backpack bounced against her shoulders as she walked toward the school entrance, and she turned once to wave her small hand, moving back and forth against the backdrop of the brick building and the bright painted fence and the gray sky that promised nothing. Evan waved back, holding the gesture until she disappeared through the glass doors, swallowed by the institution that would shape her for the next 7 hours before returning her to him. Only when she was fully gone did he let his hand drop, did he let his face relax into its natural state of exhaustion, did he allow himself to simply sit and breathe and acknowledge the effort required to get through even these simple morning tasks. The parking lot emptied around him as other parents drove away to their jobs and errands and lives, leaving Evan alone in his truck with the engine idling and his hands resting on the steering wheel. He should leave. He had an appointment to keep with himself, a schedule to maintain the machinery of his existence, requiring constant forward motion to prevent complete collapse. But he couldn't make himself move, couldn't shift the truck into gear and join the flow of traffic beyond the school gates. Minutes passed. The digital clock on the dashboard changed from 8:17 to 8:23, measuring the time he was wasting with indifferent precision. A security guard near the front entrance glanced at his truck with mild suspicion before returning to his conversation with a teacher who had emerged for a coffee break. The world continued its rotation regardless of Evan's paralysis, indifferent to his struggle to participate. He thought about the day ahead, the client emails waiting for responses, the empty hours between dropping Lily off and picking her up that stretched before him like a desert he would have to cross alone. He thought about the silence waiting for him at home, the rooms that echoed with the absence of voices, the photograph he kept face down because looking at it hurt too much and not looking at it hurt just as much in different ways. Today was significant. 6 months since his last therapy session. 6 months since Dr. Matthews had looked at him across her office with its soothing colors and its carefully chosen art and told him he was ready to continue on his own. "You have the tools," she'd said. "You've done the work. Now it's about practice, about applying what you've learned to daily life. You don't need me holding your hand anymore." He hadn't felt ready then, didn't feel ready now. But he'd nodded and thanked her and walked out of her office into a world that seemed too bright and too loud and too full of people who didn't understand what it cost him to simply exist. The 6 months since had been an exercise in maintenance. Keep showing up, keep functioning, keep performing the role of competent adult and caring father and productive professional. Don't fall apart. Don't let Lily see how close you come some days. Don't admit to anyone, including yourself, that you're barely holding on. It had worked in the sense that he hadn't collapsed entirely. He was still here, still breathing, still providing for his daughter and meeting his deadlines and maintaining the appearance of a life that was, if not thriving, at least surviving. But maintenance wasn't living. Maintenance was existing. And somewhere deep in the parts of himself that he tried not to examine too closely, Evan knew there had to be something more than this. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. He retrieved it and glanced at the screen, finding a calendar notification he had set the night before. 6-month milestone. Do something different. He'd written the reminder during a particularly difficult evening when the loneliness had pressed harder than usual, when he'd found himself counting the hours until he could reasonably go to bed and escape into unconsciousness. The reminder had seemed like a good idea at the time, a way of forcing himself to mark the occasion to acknowledge the progress he'd made, even if it didn't feel like progress. Now looking at the words on his screen, he felt the resistance rise in his chest. Do something different. What did that even mean? Different from what different? How? But even as the resistance built, another part of him recognized the importance of the instruction. Dr. Matthews had talked extensively about patterns, about the ruts that formed in a person's life when they did the same things in the same order day after day. The ruts felt safe, predictable, but they also became prisons, limiting what was possible, closing off avenues that might lead somewhere better. Small changes, she'd said. You don't have to revolutionize your life. Just do one thing differently. Take a different route to work. Try a new restaurant. Go somewhere you've never been. The specific action matters less than the willingness to disrupt the pattern to prove to yourself that change is possible. Evan sat in the parking lot, staring at his phone, feeling the familiar pull of routine, urging him to go home, to open his laptop, to answer emails and work on projects and fill the hours with the comfortable numbing of productivity. Instead, he typed a new destination into his phone's GPS. A coffee shop he'd passed hundreds of times but never entered. Morning Light. It was called, a small establishment in the commercial district that always seemed to have a warm glow in its windows and people who looked content behind the glass. He'd noticed it during school runs, during trips to the grocery store, during the countless small journeys that made up his limited geography. He'd thought vaguely that it looked nice, that it might be pleasant to sit there with a good cup of coffee and watch the world go by. And then he'd kept driving because going inside would require interaction, would require being seen, would require stepping outside the carefully constructed boundaries of his isolated existence. Today, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, those boundaries felt negotiable. The drive took 7 minutes along streets that became increasingly commercial, past strip malls and fast food restaurants, and the small downtown area that Columbus's suburbs had developed to give residents a sense of community. Morning Light occupied a corner storefront with large windows facing both streets and a modest outdoor patio that was empty now due to the November chill. Evan parked across the street in a spot that required parallel parking, a skill he'd never quite mastered, resulting in a final position that was slightly crooked but acceptable. He sat in the truck for a moment after turning off the engine, gathering his courage the way one might before jumping into cold water. It was just a coffee shop. People went to coffee shops all the time. There was nothing remarkable about walking through a door and ordering a beverage and sitting at a table. Normal people did this without any of the mental preparation that Evan found himself requiring. But Evan wasn't normal people. Hadn't been for 4 years, maybe longer. And what looked simple from the outside felt monumental from the inside, a test of capabilities he wasn't sure he still possessed. He pushed open the truck door and stepped onto the sidewalk before he could talk himself out of it. The coffee shop was warm when he entered the door, chiming softly to announce his arrival. The air smelled of roasted beans and fresh pastries, a combination that triggered memories of Sunday mornings from his childhood when his mother would take him to a bakery near their house and let him choose whatever he wanted from the case of glazed and frosted confections. The interior was exactly what he would have expected from the glimpses through the window. Exposed brick on one wall painted a warm cream on the others, mismatched furniture that somehow worked together, wooden tables and chairs, alongside comfortable armchairs and a worn leather couch. A counter at the back where a barista with purple hair and multiple ear piercings was preparing drinks with practiced efficiency. A handful of customers occupied various tables, and Evan found himself cataloging them automatically, a habit from years of hypervigilance of needing to know who was around him and what kind of threat they might pose. A woman in a business suit typing furiously on a laptop, her coffee growing cold beside her, clearly in the middle of some urgent work crisis. An elderly couple sharing a newspaper, each reading a different section, occasionally pointing something out to the other with the comfortable shorthand of decades of marriage. A young mother with a stroller, her baby sleeping peacefully, while she scrolled through her phone with the desperate attention of someone enjoying a rare moment of peace. A man about Evan's age, bearded and wearing a flannel shirt, reading a paperback novel with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was deliberately escaping from something. No one looked up when Evan entered. No one seemed to notice the momentousness of this simple act, a man choosing to exist in a public space rather than hiding in his empty house. He approached the counter where the purple-haired barista greeted him with a smile that seemed genuine rather than professionally required. "What can I get for you?" Evan studied the menu board behind her, a chalk drawing listing drinks and prices in looping script. He hadn't been to a coffee shop in years, had lost track of the terminology, the endless variations of espresso and milk and flavoring that seemed to multiply every time he paid attention to such things. "Just a regular coffee. Medium. Any room for cream?" "Black is fine." The barista rang up his order, and Evan paid with cash, avoiding the potential complication of a card reader that might not cooperate. He took his coffee to a table near the window, choosing a spot where he could see both the street outside and the door to the interior, where he could watch without being watched, observe without being observed. The coffee was good, better than the instant he made at home, better than the gas station cups he grabbed occasionally when deadlines demanded late nights. It had actual flavor, complex and rich, the kind of taste that demanded attention, rather than serving merely as a caffeine delivery system. Evan wrapped his hands around the warm cup and let himself simply exist in this unfamiliar space. No laptop, no phone, no task demanding his attention. Just a man sitting alone in a coffee shop, watching the world go by through a slightly smudged window, practicing the forgotten art of being present without purpose. Time passed differently here. Without the structure of work or responsibility, The minutes seemed to expand to hold more than their usual content. Evan noticed things he hadn't noticed in years. The way light fell through the window and made patterns on the wooden table. The sound of the espresso machine, a rhythmic hissing and gurgling that was strangely soothing. The low murmur of conversation from other tables, words he couldn't quite make out, but that formed a kind of ambient music. He thought about Dr. Matthews, about the 6 months of work they'd done together before she deemed him ready for release. They'd talked about Sarah, about the abandonment, about the complicated mixture of anger and grief and shame that he'd carried since that night. They'd talked about Lily, about his fears for her, about his determination to be enough for both of them, even when he suspected he wasn't enough for himself. They'd talked about his parents, about the accident that had killed them, about the way that loss had prepared him in some ways for what Sarah would eventually do. Loss upon loss. That was his story. People leaving by choice or by chance, and Evan learning to navigate the absences they left behind. But loss isn't the whole story, Dr. Matthews had said during one of their later sessions. It's a significant chapter, but you get to write the rest. You get to decide what happens next. At the time, the words had felt hollow therapeutic platitudes that sounded good but didn't match the reality of his experience. How could he write what happened next when he could barely get through what was happening now? How could he imagine a future different from this endless present of maintenance and survival? But sitting here in this coffee shop he'd never entered before, doing something different, for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt a small stirring of something that might have been possibility. The world was larger than the routes between his house and Lily's school. Life contained more options than the ones he'd been choosing by default. He didn't know what to do with that recognition. Didn't know how to translate it into action or change or any of the things that might make his life less small. But he noticed it, acknowledged it, let it exist alongside all the heavier feelings that usually occupied his attention. And for now, that was enough. He stayed at the coffee shop for almost 2 hours longer than he'd intended, ordering a second cup when the first ran out, letting the morning slip by in a way that felt both indulgent and necessary. Eventually, the pressure of deadlines reasserted itself, and he gathered his things and headed for the door. The barista called out, "Have a good one," as he left, and he raised a hand in acknowledgement, surprised to find that he felt something close to good, something close to what good might feel like if he remembered how to recognize it. The drive home was familiar, but felt different somehow, as though the brief detour had shifted something in his perception. The same streets and houses and signs, but viewed through eyes that had seen something new, that had proven to themselves that new was possible. He'd done something different. One small thing, a coffee shop visit that would mean nothing to anyone else, but felt significant to him, a crack in the pattern, a suggestion that the walls of his existence might have doors he hadn't noticed. Tomorrow he would probably fall back into routine. Go straight home after dropping Lily off, open his laptop, answer emails, do exactly what he'd done for years. The gravity of habit was strong, and one morning's deviation wasn't enough to permanently alter his orbit. But he'd done it once, which meant he could do it again, which meant maybe eventually the detours would become their own kind of pattern, a new routine that included space for the unexpected, for the different, for the possibility of something more than survival. Evan pulled into his driveway and sat for a moment looking at the house he'd lived in for 8 years, the house where he'd brought Lily home from the hospital, the house where Sarah had left him, the house that contained all his history and all his pain and all his love for the small person who made everything worthwhile. It looked the same as it always did. Nothing had changed on the outside, but something had shifted on the inside. Small and fragile and uncertain, but real. He went inside and opened his laptop and answered client emails and did all the things his day required. But he also made a decision, quiet and private, that he would return to the coffee shop tomorrow. And the day after that, and the day after that. Small steps, Dr. Matthews had said. That's all change requires. Small steps in a different direction. He was ready to take them. The coffee shop became a habit over the following weeks, settling into Evan's routine with surprising ease. Every morning after dropping Lily at school, he would drive to Morning Light, order his black coffee, and take the same table by the window. He brought his laptop, now answering emails and working on projects while the shop hummed around him, discovering that the work came easier here than it did in the silence of his empty house. There was something about being surrounded by people, even if he didn't interact with them, that made the hours feel less oppressive. The ambient noise of conversation and espresso machines became a kind of white noise, drowning out the thoughts that tended to spiral when he was alone. The occasional glance from other customers, the nod of recognition from the barista who had learned his order, these small acknowledgments of his existence felt like anchors, tethering him to a world that sometimes felt like it was drifting away. He learned the rhythms of the shop, the patterns of its regulars. The businesswoman with the perpetually cold coffee appeared every weekday at exactly 7:45 and stayed until 9:30, her face illuminated by her laptop screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard with aggressive efficiency. The elderly couple came on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always ordering the same thing, always reading their newspaper, always leaving a generous tip. The young mother rotated through the week unpredictably, her schedule clearly dictated by the whims of the baby, who sometimes slept peacefully and sometimes demanded attention with the piercing cry of someone who would not be ignored. The bearded man appeared sporadically, always reading a different paperback, always sitting in the same armchair by the fireplace that was decorative rather than functional. And then there was the woman. Evan noticed her on his third visit, which was a Tuesday. She arrived around 11 after the morning rush had subsided and the shop had entered its quieter midday phase. She ordered something complicated that involved multiple adjectives and came in a cup the size of a small bowl, then took a seat at a table across the room, pulling a book from her bag and settling in with the practiced comfort of someone who did this often. She was maybe 30, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. She wore jeans and a sweater the color of autumn leaves, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in her own skin. Evan tried not to stare, tried to focus on his laptop screen and the client email he was supposed to be answering. But his attention kept drifting across the room, kept noticing details that should have been unremarkable. The way she tucked one leg beneath her on the chair, the way she turned pages slowly savoring rather than rushing, the way she occasionally smiled at something in her book, a private expression meant for no one but herself. He didn't know why he noticed her. Didn't know why, out of all the regulars who populated the coffee shop, this particular stranger had caught his attention in a way the others hadn't. She wasn't the most conventionally beautiful woman in the room. She wasn't doing anything interesting or unusual. She was simply reading a book and drinking complicated coffee and existing in public the way people did. But something about her drew his eye, held his attention, made him aware of her presence in a way that felt unfamiliar and slightly alarming. He hadn't noticed a woman in 4 years, hadn't allowed himself to notice, hadn't had the emotional capacity to register attraction or interest or any of the feelings that might lead toward connection. Sarah's departure had cauterized something inside him, had left scar tissue where the ability to want someone had once been. The woman looked up from her book, and for a moment their eyes met across the room. Evan looked away quickly, embarrassed to be caught staring, his face heating with a flush that felt adolescent and absurd. When he risked another glance, she had returned to her reading, showing no sign that she'd noticed his attention. He gathered his things and left shortly after, feeling foolish and unsettled, and something else he couldn't name. The encounter, if it could even be called that, had lasted seconds. They hadn't spoken, hadn't exchanged anything more than a brief glance that probably meant nothing to her and everything to him. But as he drove home, Evan found himself wondering about her, who she was, what she did, what book had made her smile like that, like she was sharing a private joke with an old friend. The wondering felt dangerous, felt like the first crack in a wall he'd built specifically to prevent this kind of vulnerability. He pushed the thoughts aside, focused on the road ahead, told himself that she was just a stranger in a coffee shop and that there was no reason to give her any more mental real estate than he'd give any other stranger. It worked mostly for the rest of the day. He picked up Lily from school, made dinner, supervised homework, performed all the rituals of evening that had become second nature. He didn't think about the woman with the dark hair and the autumn sweater, didn't think about the way she'd smiled at her book, didn't think about anything except the immediate demands of parenthood and the familiar comfort of routine. But that night, lying in bed staring at the water stain shaped like Ohio, he thought about her again. And he wondered what it meant that after 4 years of not noticing anyone, of deliberately not noticing anyone, he had finally noticed someone. Maybe it meant nothing. Probably it meant nothing. People noticed other people all the time without it leading anywhere, without it meaning anything beyond the momentary acknowledgement of another human's existence. But maybe it meant something else. Maybe it meant that the numbness was starting to fade, that the scar tissue was becoming more flexible, that he was beginning to heal in ways he hadn't known were possible. The thought was terrifying, and also buried beneath the terror something else, something that might have been hope. Evan fell asleep eventually, and if he dreamed about a woman reading in a coffee shop, he didn't remember it in the morning. The woman appeared again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. She seemed to have her own routine, arriving around 11, ordering her complicated drinks, settling into the same corner with her book, or sometimes a laptop. They didn't speak, didn't interact beyond the occasional polite nod of recognition that regular customers exchange with other regular customers. But Evan found himself anticipating her arrival, found himself disappointed on the rare days when she didn't appear. He learned small things about her through observation, the way one learns about wildlife by patient watching. She favored sweaters and earth tones. She read quickly but not carelessly, giving each page its due attention before moving to the next. She was kind to the baristas, always thanking them by name, always leaving her table clean when she left. He invented stories about her imaginary backstories that helped him make sense of his fascination. She was a writer working on a novel that would someday win awards. She was a professor preparing lectures in the comfortable anonymity of a public space. She was a spy using a coffee shop as a cover while she monitored enemies and transmitted coded messages in her complicated drink orders. The stories were ridiculous, and he knew they were ridiculous, and he kept inventing them anyway because it was easier than acknowledging the truth that he was attracted to a stranger, that he wanted to know her, that after 4 years of isolation, he was finally feeling the pull toward another person. 2 weeks into his coffee shop habit, on a gray November morning that threatened rain, she surprised him. He was deep in a particularly frustrating project, a logo redesign for a client who had changed direction so many times that Evan had lost count when a voice cut through his concentration. "Mind if I sit here? All the outlets are taken except this one." Evan looked up to find her standing beside his table laptop, tucked under one arm, indicating the electrical outlet near his feet. She was smiling that same private smile he'd seen her direct at her books, and up close he could see details he'd missed from across the room. A small scar above her left eyebrow, the fine lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested she smiled often, a tiny mole on her jaw that disappeared when she turned her head. "No, that's fine. Go ahead." His voice came out rougher than intended, rusty with disuse. He couldn't remember the last time he'd spoken to an adult who wasn't a client or a school administrator or one of the service workers who populated the margins of his existence. The sound of his own voice making casual conversation felt foreign, like trying to speak a language he had once been fluent in but had mostly forgotten. She sat down across from him, plugging in her laptop, arranging her things with efficient movements. The proximity felt electric, charged with a significance that probably existed only in his imagination. She was just a stranger who needed an outlet. There was nothing more to it than that. For a few minutes they worked in silence, two people sharing a table in a coffee shop. Nothing more. Evan stared at his screen without seeing it, hyper-aware of her presence, of the soft sound of her breathing, of the occasional click of her keyboard. Then she looked up and said, "I'm Nora. I've seen you here before." "Evan." The word came out too quickly, too eagerly. He forced himself to slow down. "I've seen you too." The quiet guy with the laptop. "You're always watching the door when you're not looking at your screen, like you're waiting for someone who might not show up." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Evan felt exposed, seen in a way he hadn't anticipated from a stranger he'd never spoken to before. Just people watching. Old habit. Nora tilted her head slightly, studying him with an attention that made him want to look away. "You don't have to explain. I do it too. Occupational hazard." "Then what's your occupation?" Something flickered across her face there and gone. "I used to be a nurse, pediatric oncology. You spend years reading people, learning to see what they're not saying. It becomes automatic." Used to be. The past tense hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "What do you do now?" Evan asked. "I'm figuring that out, taking some time to decide what comes next." She paused, then added, "What about you? What brings someone to a coffee shop a fruity morning with a laptop and a look like the weight of the world is sitting on his shoulders?" Evan almost laughed at the bluntness. Most people danced around observations like that, softening their words. avoiding anything that might make a conversation uncomfortable. Nora apparently operated by different rules. Graphic design, freelance. I can work from anywhere and my house gets quiet after I drop my daughter at school. How old? 7. Her name's Lily. Nora's expression warmed. That's a good age. Old enough to be interesting, young enough to still think you're cool. I'm not sure she thinks I'm cool. She probably does. She just won't admit it for another 20 years. The exchange felt easy, natural, like a conversation between people who already knew each other, rather than strangers meeting for the first time. Evan found himself relaxing into it, found the hypervigilance that usually accompanied social interaction beginning to fade. And as for the weight of the world, he said, surprising himself by returning to her observation, maybe I'm just tired. It's been a long few years. I understand long years. Nora's voice carried a weight that suggested she wasn't speaking generally. Some seasons last longer than they should. She turned back to her laptop and Evan felt the conversation close like a door gently shutting. But something had shifted. The wall between them had developed a crack and light was beginning to seep through. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour, occasionally looking up, occasionally catching each other's glances and exchanging small smiles. When Nora finally packed up her things to leave, she paused beside the table. Same time tomorrow. Evan nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady. See you then, Evan. She walked out and he watched her go, and the coffee shop felt emptier after she left, as though she'd taken some vital energy with her that he hadn't known he needed until it was gone. He stayed longer than usual that day, ordering a third cup of coffee he didn't really want, trying to process what had just happened. A conversation. That was all, a few minutes of small talk with a stranger who happened to be friendly, who happened to need an electrical outlet, who happened to have eyes that seemed to see more than they should. It meant nothing, probably meant nothing. But as Evan drove home, he found himself already looking forward to tomorrow, already counting the hours until he would return to morning light and the table by the window and the woman named Nora who used to be a nurse and understood long years and had asked to see him again. For the first time in 4 years, he was looking forward to something. The feeling was unfamiliar and frightening and wonderful all at once. The coffee shop meetings became a fixture of Evan's life over the following weeks, as reliable as the morning alarm and the drive to Lily's school and all the other rituals that structured his existence. He and Nora met every day, sharing the same table, working on their respective projects, exchanging conversation in the gaps between tasks. The exchanges started small, surface-level observations about the weather and the coffee and the eccentric regulars who populated the shop. But gradually, incrementally, they deepened into something more substantial. Evan learned that Nora had grown up in a small town 2 hours south of Columbus, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs after her father left when she was 6. She had put herself through nursing school on scholarships and sheer determination had spent 12 years in pediatric oncology at the Children's Hospital downtown, had dedicated her career to helping families navigate the worst imaginable circumstances. It was hard work, she said one morning, her hands wrapped around her complicated coffee, her eyes distant with memory. Watching kids fight diseases that shouldn't exist, watching parents try to hold themselves together when everything was falling apart. But it was also the most meaningful thing I've ever done. Knowing that I was helping even in small ways, even when we couldn't save everyone. What made you leave? The question hung between them, and Evan watched Nora's face cycle through expressions he couldn't quite read. She had mentioned the past tense before the used to be. That suggested a story she wasn't ready to tell. He hadn't pushed, had let her share at her own pace, had respected the boundaries that everyone had around their most painful experiences. I lost someone, she said finally, her voice quiet. A patient, Margaret. She was 73 in the cancer center for a different kind of treatment, but she ended up on my floor when there weren't enough beds elsewhere. She had no family, no one to sit with her, so I did. Every shift, every day I worked, I spent my breaks in her room. Evan waited, giving her space, recognizing the weight of what she was sharing. We became close. Closer than nurses are supposed to get with patients, but I couldn't help it. She was sharp, funny, even when she was in pain. She told me once that I reminded her of the daughter she never had. That meeting me was the best thing about getting sick. Nora's eyes were bright now, but she didn't look away. She died 8 months ago. In the middle of a night shift, she called for me, said she was scared, didn't want to be alone at the end. So I sat with her, held her hand, told her everything would be okay, even though we both knew it wouldn't. She died an hour later with her hand in mine, and I wasn't ready for it. I thought I had prepared myself, but I wasn't. "I'm sorry," Evan said, and the words felt inadequate, but they were the only ones he had. After that, I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't walk onto the floor without seeing her room, feeling her hand go cold. So I quit, told myself I needed a break, needed time to process. And now here I am, 8 months later, still processing, still figuring out what comes next. The confession created an opening, a space where Evan could share his own story if he chose to. He recognized the gift she was giving him, the vulnerability she was offering, the implicit invitation to reciprocate. And so he did. "I have a daughter," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue, weighted with all the history they contained. "Lily, she's 7. Her mother left when she was 1. Nora didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence with expressions of sympathy or curiosity. She simply waited, present and attentive, giving him the same space he had given her. Sarah, that was her name, is her name, I suppose. We met in college, got married too young, had Lily before we were ready. I thought we were building something. I thought we were happy." He paused, gathering the courage to continue. "One night I woke up and she was gone. Packed a bag while I slept, left in the middle of the night without saying goodbye. She sent a text the next morning. Just said, 'I can't do this. I'm sorry.' That was it. No explanation, no discussion, just gone. Did you ever find out why? Eventually, pieces of it anyway. She'd been struggling for months without telling me. Postpartum depression, maybe something more. The doctors we talked to before the wedding had mentioned a history of anxiety, but I didn't know it could get that bad. She suffered in silence, kept it all hidden, and then one day it was too much and she ran." Evan's jaw tightened against the familiar mixture of anger and grief and something that might have been pity. "The hardest part wasn't that she left me. I could have survived that. The hardest part was that she left Lily, a 1-year-old baby who didn't understand why mommy wasn't there anymore, who asked for her for months afterward, who cried at night, who kept looking at the door like she might walk through it at any moment. That must have been devastating. It broke something in me. Not just the leaving, but the way she left. The secrecy, the cowardice of disappearing without a word. I spent years trying to make sense of it, trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. I went through a period where I could barely function." He looked at Nora, saw understanding in her eyes rather than pity, and felt something loosen in his chest. "I ended up in therapy, a mental health program twice a week for almost 2 years. They helped me understand that what Sarah did wasn't about me or Lily. It was about her own demons, her own inability to face what was happening inside her. I can have compassion for that while still being angry about how she handled it. And now I manage most days. I've been out of the program for 6 months. Things haven't gotten worse, but they haven't gotten better either. I maintain, I survive. I show up for Lily and for my clients and for all the things that require my presence. But I haven't let anyone get close since Sarah left. Haven't trusted anyone enough to risk it." The admission hung between them, heavy with implication. Evan had just told this woman, this stranger he'd known for only a few weeks more than he'd told anyone outside of his therapist's office. The words had come out without his consciously choosing to release them, drawn forth by something in her presence, in her attention, in the quality of understanding she offered. Nora was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "So we're both hiding from something. It looks that way. And yet here we are, talking to each other, sharing things we don't share with anyone else." She tilted her head slightly. "What do you think that means?" Evan didn't have an answer. He only knew that something had shifted, that the walls he had so carefully constructed had developed cracks he wasn't sure he wanted to repair. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I'd like to find out." Nora smiled, and the expression transformed her face, chasing away the shadows of grief that had gathered during her own confession. "I think I'd like that too." The weeks that followed took on a new texture, colored by the deepening connection between Evan and Nora. They began meeting outside the coffee shop, their interactions expanding beyond the table by the window into the larger world. Lunch at a small diner near the park, afternoon walks along the river path, where ducks paddled through water that reflected the gray November sky. Phone calls in the evening after Lily was asleep, conversations that stretched for hours and left Evan feeling lighter than he had in years. He learned the small details of her life, the particular facts that made her who she was. She loved thunderstorms, found them soothing rather than frightening, would open her windows during summer storms just to listen to the rain and feel the electricity in the air. She hated cilantro with an intensity that seemed disproportionate to the herb's actual presence in cuisine, claiming it tasted like soap and ruined everything it touched. She had been engaged once years ago to a medical resident she'd met during her first year as a nurse. The relationship had ended when he decided he wanted someone less complicated, someone whose own ambitions and needs took up less space. The rejection had reinforced her belief that she was too much for lasting love, that the intensity she brought to everything was a liability rather than an asset. "He told me I was too intense," she said during one of their walks, "that I cared too much about things, that I couldn't just relax and be happy, like caring was a character flaw that I needed to fix." Sounds like he was the one with the character flaw. Nora laughed, a sound that Evan had grown to treasure. "That's what I told myself afterward. But part of me wondered if he was right, if I was too much, if I needed to be less to be lovable." "You're not too much." "How do you know? You've only known me for a few weeks." "I know because I see how you treat people. The baristas at the coffee shop, the strangers you pass on the street, the way you talk about Margaret, about your patients, about everyone who's ever mattered to you. You care deeply, and that's not a flaw. That's a gift." Nora looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something that combined surprise and gratitude, and something else he didn't want to name yet. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in a long time." Evan learned about her too, opened himself up in ways that felt both terrifying and necessary. He told her about his parents, about the accident that had killed them when he was 22, about the way that loss had shaped him even before Sarah's abandonment added another layer of grief. He told her about Lily, about his fears for her, about his determination to be enough for both of them, even when he suspected he wasn't enough for himself. "She's amazing," he said one evening, during a phone call that had stretched past midnight. "Smart, funny, more resilient than any kid should have to be. She deserves so much more than I can give her." "What do you think she deserves?" "A normal family, 2 parents, a mother who didn't leave, all the things I can't provide no matter how hard I try." "But you're there. Every day you're there. That counts for something." "Does it?" "Sometimes I feel like I'm just going through the motions, like I'm so consumed by my own damage that I can't fully be present for her." "Evan," Nora's voice was gentle but firm, "the fact that you worry about whether you're being present enough is proof that you care. Bad parents don't question themselves like that. Bad parents don't spend sleepless nights wondering if they're doing right by their children. The worry is evidence of love." He let the words settle over him, tried to believe them, even when his inner critic whispered that she was just being kind, just saying what he wanted to hear. "I'd like you to meet her someday," Nora said, surprising him. "Lily, if that's something you'd be comfortable with." The suggestion made his chest tighten with a mixture of hope and fear. Introducing Nora to Lily would be a threshold, a crossing point that couldn't be uncrossed. It would mean making this real, acknowledging that what was developing between them had potential beyond coffee shop conversations and evening phone calls. "That's a big step," he said carefully. "I know. That's why I said someday, not tomorrow." He could hear the smile in her voice. "There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere." The words landed with unexpected weight. "I'm not going anywhere." Such a simple promise, exactly what Evan needed to hear, exactly what Sarah had never said and never meant. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Anything." "Why me?" "You could have anyone. You're smart, beautiful, kind. Why would you choose to get involved with a single father who can barely hold himself together most days?" Nora was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I recognize something in you," she said finally. "Because I don't think you're as damaged as you believe you are. Wounded, yes. Struggling, definitely. But damaged implies something beyond repair. And I've seen the way you talk about Lily, the way your whole face changes when you mention her. Someone beyond repair wouldn't have that capacity for love. And And I'm tired of being alone, tired of protecting myself from people because I'm scared of losing them. Margaret taught me that loving someone means risking loss, and I spent months afterward thinking that meant I should never love anyone again. But that's no way to live. That's just existing, and existing isn't enough anymore. Evan felt something shift inside him, some final resistance giving way to something stronger. I'm scared, he admitted. The last time I let someone in, they destroyed me. I know. I don't know if I can do this. Don't know if I have the capacity to trust like that again. I know that too. Nora's voice was steady, patient, willing to wait. But here's the thing, I'm not asking you to trust me completely, not yet. I'm just asking you to try. One step at a time, one day at a time. And if it gets too hard, if you need to slow down or pull back, I'll understand. You would, Bo? I would, because I'm scared too, because I know what it's like to care about someone and lose them, but I'd rather try and risk the pain than spend the rest of my life wondering what might have been. They talked for another hour after that about fears and hopes and all the complicated feelings that accompanied the beginning of something new. When they finally said goodnight, Evan lay in bed for a long time staring at the water stain on the ceiling, thinking about everything that had changed in the weeks since he'd first walked into morning light. He had gone to a coffee shop to do something different, to break the pattern of isolation that had defined his life for 4 years. He hadn't expected to find Nora, hadn't expected to find hope, hadn't expected to find himself standing at the edge of something that terrified him and called to him in equal measure. But here he was, at the edge, ready to step forward or retreat, to choose connection or safety, to risk everything or lose the chance for something he hadn't known he needed until he glimpsed its possibility. The choice felt momentous, life-changing, the kind of decision that would divide his history into before and after, regardless of which option he chose. Evan closed his eyes and listened to the silence of the house, the soft sounds of Lily sleeping down the hall, the tick of the clock in the kitchen counting seconds he could never get back. He thought about Sarah, about the destruction she had left behind, about the years he had spent rebuilding from the wreckage of her departure. He thought about Dr. Matthews, about the tools she had given him, about the 6 months of proving to himself that he could survive without support. He thought about Nora, about her smile, about her laugh, about the way she looked at him like he was worth looking at. And somewhere in the quiet of that November night, Evan Carter made a decision. He would try. He would take the risk, face the fear, step towards something that might destroy him or might save him, because the alternative, staying safe in a lane and maintained, wasn't living. It was just surviving, and he was tired of merely surviving. Tomorrow he would go to the coffee shop. He would sit at the table by the window. He would wait for Nora to arrive, and he would tell her that he was ready. Ready to ready to trust, ready to believe that maybe after everything there was still space for something beautiful to grow. The decision settled over him like a blanket, warm and comforting after years of cold. He slept better that night than he had in years. The conversation with Lily came 2 weeks later on a Tuesday evening that felt significant even before it began. Evan had spent the intervening days deepening his connection with Nora, building the foundation that would support whatever they were becoming. More coffee shop mornings, more walks, more phone calls that stretched into the small hours. Each interaction confirmed what he had sensed from the beginning, that this was real, that she was real, that the feelings growing between them had substance and potential. But none of it would matter if Lily wasn't comfortable with it. He had made himself a promise years ago when Sarah left that he would never put his own needs above his daughter's well-being. Any relationship he pursued would have to include her, would have to earn her approval, would have to prioritize her security above his own desire for connection. They were eating dinner spaghetti with marinara sauce that Lily had helped him make when he decided the time had come. "Lily, I wanted to talk to you about something." She looked up from her plate, a strand of pasta dangling from her fork, her expression immediately wary. "Is it about a dog? Because I've been really good, and I think I'm ready for the responsibility." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Evan smiled. "It's not about a dog." "Oh." Her face fell slightly, then shifted to curiosity. "What's it about?" "It's about a friend of mine, a woman named Nora." Lily's eyes narrowed with the shrewd assessment that children were capable of when they sensed something significant. 7 years old, and already she could read situations with an accuracy that sometimes unnerved him. "What kind of friend a good friend, someone I've been spending time with, getting to know, someone I like very much. Lily processed this information, her fork still suspended in midair, the pasta now trailing sauce onto the table. She didn't seem to notice. Is she your girlfriend? The directness caught him off guard, as Lily's directness often did. He had prepared various explanations, various ways of framing the relationship that might be easier for a 7-year-old to understand. But Lily had cut straight to the heart of the matter, as she always did. I think she might be, Evan admitted, or she might become that. We're still figuring it out. What's she like? She's kind, smart. She used to be a nurse taking care of sick kids. She has a laugh that sounds like music, and she tells really bad jokes that somehow make you laugh anyway. Does she like pancakes? The question seemed like a non sequitur, but Evan had learned that Lily's seemingly random inquiries often had a logic of their own. I'm not sure why, because pancakes are the most important meal. If she doesn't like pancakes, I don't know if I can trust her. Evan hid his smile behind his hand. I'll make sure to ask her. Good. Lily finally noticed the sauce dripping onto the table and lowered her fork. And does she know about me, that I exist and everything? She knows all about you. I talk about you all the time. She says you sound amazing and she'd really like to meet you, if you're okay with that. Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing this information with the seriousness it deserved. Evan watched her face, trying to read her expressions, trying to anticipate her concerns so he could address them. Would she live here like Mom used to? The question made his chest ache. Like Mom used to. As if Sarah's presence was a template, a pattern that any new woman in his life would have to fit into. No, sweetheart, not right away. She has her own place. We're just getting to know each other. If things worked out, if we all got along, maybe someday things might change. But nothing happens without you being okay with it. You're the most important person in my life. Nothing changes that. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing this. Okay, I'll meet her, but I get to ask her questions to make sure she's good enough for you. That seems fair. And if I don't like her, you have to stop seeing her. Evan hesitated. He didn't want to make a promise he might not be able to keep, didn't want to give Lily veto power over his romantic life in a way that might not be healthy for either of them. But he also understood what she was really asking. Do I matter? Will you choose me? If you have serious concerns, he said carefully, we'll talk about them together. And I'll listen to what you have to say. If there's a real problem, something that makes you uncomfortable or scared, we'll figure it out. But I also want you to give her a chance. Can you do that? Lily considered this negotiation with the careful attention of a diplomat reviewing treaty terms. Okay, she said finally, I'll give her a chance. But she has to come for breakfast first, on a Saturday, and she has to eat pancakes. I think that can be arranged. With chocolate chips, not blueberries. Chocolate chips are the real test. Evan laughed, the tension that had been building in his shoulders finally releasing. Chocolate chip pancakes it is. Lily returned to her spaghetti, apparently satisfied that the important terms had been established. But a few minutes later, she looked up again, her expression softer now. Daddy. Yes, sweetheart? I'm glad you have a friend. You seem happier lately, less tired. The observation struck him with unexpected force. He had been trying so hard to hide his struggles from her, to project competence and stability, even when he felt neither. But children saw things. They noticed changes that adults tried to conceal. Do I? Yeah, you smile more, and you don't stare at walls as much. He hadn't realized she'd noticed the wall staring. Another reminder that his attempts to protect her from his pain were never as successful as he hoped. Well, he said, Nora makes me happy, and you make me happy. I'm lucky to have both of you. Lily smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. You're pretty okay too, Daddy. Just okay. Pretty okay, that's almost good. I'll take it. They finished dinner together, the conversation moving to lighter topics, to Lily's day at school, and the lizard Marcus had brought for show and tell, and the spelling test she was confident she would ace. But beneath the ordinary exchange, something had shifted. Lily knew about Nora now, had agreed to meet her, had given her blessing, such as it was, for this new person to enter their lives. It wasn't permission exactly. Evan didn't need his daughter's permission to date someone, but it was something almost more important. It was participation. Lily felt included in the decision, felt like her opinions mattered, Felt like this change was happening with her rather than to her. That was what he wanted, what he needed. For their family of two to expand not through imposition, but through consensus, through the gradual building of relationships that served everyone involved. He texted Nora after Lily went to bed. Talk to Lily. She wants to meet you. Saturday morning. Pancakes. Be warned, this is apparently a test. The response came quickly. I'm ready. Chocolate chips or bust. He smiled at his phone, feeling lighter than he had in years. The next stage was beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Saturday arrived with the kind of nervous energy that preceded significant events. Evan woke earlier than usual, lying in bed and running through scenarios, imagining all the ways the morning might go wrong. Lily could decide she hated Nora on sight. Nora could be overwhelmed by the reality of dating someone with a child. The pancakes could burn. The conversation could stall. Everything could collapse before it even began. These were the thoughts that had kept him awake for portions of the night, the familiar catastrophizing that his therapist had spent months teaching him to recognize and redirect. Most worst-case scenarios don't happen, Dr. Matthews had said, but your brain will make you feel like they're imminent and inevitable. The skill is learning to sit with the anxiety without letting it determine your actions. He sat with the anxiety, now acknowledging it, letting it exist without surrendering to it. Then he got up and started preparing for what would hopefully be the beginning of something wonderful. Nora arrived at 900 exactly punctual in a way that it suggested she'd been circling the block waiting for the precise moment. She wore jeans and a sweater that Evan recognized from the coffee shop, comfortable clothes, rather than anything that might suggest she was trying too hard. Her hair was down loose around her shoulders, and she carried a small gift bag that she hadn't mentioned bringing. Hi, she said when he opened the door. Her smile was nervous but genuine. Hi. He stepped aside to let her in. She's in the kitchen. Fair warning, she's been preparing interview questions. Nora laughed, though it came out slightly shaky. How tough of an interviewer is she? Ruthless, absolutely ruthless. They walked to the kitchen together, where Lily was sitting at the table in her favorite purple dress, her hair neatly brushed, a task Evan had accomplished with only minimal protest, her expression arranged into something that was clearly intended to be serious and evaluative. Hello, Lily said formally, like a tiny CEO beginning a board meeting. You must be Nora. And you must be Lily. Nora stopped a few feet from the table, maintaining a respectful distance. I've heard so much about you. My dad talks about me all the time. He says you're the smartest, funniest, most amazing person he knows. Lily's formal expression wavered slightly, pleased despite her attempts to maintain composure. He says that every day, usually multiple times. Evan watched the exchange from the doorway, his heart in his throat. This was the moment, the test that would determine so much of what came next. If Lily and Nora couldn't connect, couldn't find common ground, the relationship would face obstacles that might prove insurmountable. But Nora was handling it perfectly, treating Lily with respect rather than condescension, speaking to her like a real person rather than a child who needed to be managed. And Lily was responding to that respect, softening her defensive posture, opening up in the way she did when she felt genuinely seen. I have some questions for you, Lily announced. If you're going to be my dad's girlfriend, I need to make sure you're appropriate. I think you mean appropriate, Evan interjected gently. That's what I said. Lily shot him a look that clearly communicated his commentary was unwelcome. Question 1. Do you like pancakes? Nora sat down across from Lily, settling into the interview with apparent seriousness. I love pancakes. They're probably my favorite breakfast food. What kind? Chocolate chip. Definitely chocolate chip. Lily nodded approvingly, making a mental note that Evan imagined involved check marks and scoring systems. Question 2. Do you like dogs? I love dogs. I had one growing up, a golden retriever named Buddy. He was the best. I want a dog, but Dad says no. Dogs are a lot of responsibility, but they are also wonderful companions. Maybe someday your dad will change his mind. Lily glanced at Evan with an expression that clearly said, see, Nora gets it. He raised his hands in surrender. Question 3, Lily continued, and this is the important one. Nora leaned forward slightly, giving the question her full attention. I'm ready. My mom left when I was a baby. She didn't say goodbye. Lily's voice was matter-of-fact, but Evan could see the vulnerability beneath the surface. Are you going to leave too? The room went quiet. Evan held his breath, watching Nora's face, waiting to see how she would handle this most difficult of questions. Nora didn't flinch, didn't look away from Lily's searching gaze. I'm going to be very honest with you, she said, her voice steady and kind. I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen. I can't see the future, and sometimes life surprises us in ways we don't expect. Lily's expression flickered, bracing for disappointment. But I can promise you this, Nora continued. I will never leave without saying goodbye. I will never disappear in the middle of the night. And if I ever have to go somewhere, I will explain why, and I will make sure you know it's not because of anything you did. Because you are wonderful, Lily. Your dad was right about that. And anyone who would leave you without saying goodbye isn't someone who deserves to be in your life. Lily studied Nora's face for a long moment, using whatever internal measurement system children used to assess the truthfulness of adults. Pinky promise, she said finally. Nora extended her pinky. Pinky promise. Their fingers linked and something passed between them, some understanding that transcended words. When they separated, Lily's formal demeanor had softened into something more natural, more childlike. Okay, she said, you can stay, but you have to help make the pancakes. Nora grinned. I would love to help make the pancakes. What followed was the happiest morning Evan could remember experiencing in years. They made pancakes together, all three of them, in a kitchen that had known only 2 inhabitants for so long that adding a third felt revolutionary. Nora turned out to be good at cooking efficiently, managing the griddle, while Evan mixed batter and Lily supervised with the critical eye of a quality control inspector. There was flour on the counter and batter drips on the floor, and at one point Lily managed to flip a pancake onto the ceiling, where it stuck for several seconds before falling with a splat that made them all laugh so hard they had to pause the cooking to recover. Evan watched Nora and Lily interact, watched them find their rhythm, watched them begin building something that might become its own relationship separate from his connection to either of them. Lily showed off her pancake flipping technique, which needed work, and shared her opinions on proper chocolate chip distribution. More was always better, and interrogated Nora about her favorite colors, blue favorite animals, dogs obviously, and favorite superhero Wonder Woman, because she was strong and kind at the same time. Nora answered every question with patience and genuine interest, treating Lily's inquiries as important rather than trivial, giving her the full attention that children craved and rarely received from adults who were always distracted by more important matters. When they finally sat down to eat, the table covered with imperfect but delicious pancakes, Evan felt something unlock in his chest, something that had been closed for so long he'd forgotten it could open. These are really good, Lily announced through a mouthful of chocolate chip pancake. You passed the test. There was a test, Nora asked with mock surprise. The pancake test. It's very important. You can tell a lot about a person by how they make pancakes. What did my pancakes tell you about me? Lily considered this seriously. That you're patient, because you waited for the bubbles before flipping like Dad taught me. And that you're fair, because you put the same amount of chocolate chips in every pancake, not more in yours like I do sometimes. And that you laugh a lot, which is good. Dad doesn't laugh enough. Evan's throat tightened at his daughter's casual observation. Dad doesn't laugh enough. Another reminder that she saw more than he wanted her to see, understood more than he wanted her to understand. Well, Nora said, glancing at Evan with warm eyes, maybe I can help with that. The morning stretched into afternoon, the pancakes giving way to board games and conversations, and the easy companionship that Evan had forgotten could exist between people who were still getting to know each other. Lily showed Nora her room, her collection of stuffed animals, her artwork from school, all the treasures that mattered most to a 7-year-old girl who had decided to trust this new person with the important parts of her life. When Nora finally left in the late afternoon, Lily hugged her goodbye, a spontaneous gesture that made Evan's heart clench with gratitude and hope. You'll come back, right? Lily asked, looking up at Nora with eyes that were trying hard not to show how much the answer mattered. Nora crouched down to Lily's level. I'll come back, as many times as you'll have me. Good, Lily nodded decisively, because you still have to teach me that trick you showed me, the one with the pancake flip. It's a date. Evan walked Nora to her car, leaving Lily inside with instructions to start cleaning up the kitchen. That went well, Nora said when they were alone. At least I think it did. It went better than well. She loved you. She's amazing, Evan. You've done such an incredible job with her. I've just been trying not to mess her up. You haven't. Nora reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. You've given her stability, love, everything a child needs. She's thriving because of you. And now she'll have even more. He covered her hand with his. Because of you. They stood there for a moment in the driveway of his small house in the afternoon light of a November Saturday that had turned out better than he could have imagined. Everything felt possible. Everything felt like it might actually work out. Same time next weekend, Nora asked. Actually, I was thinking, maybe dinner. All three of us. There's a place Lily loves, nothing fancy, but they have good mac and cheese and crayons for the tables. That sounds perfect. And maybe after that, we could start talking about whatever comes next. Nora smiled that smile he'd first seen across a coffee shop, or the one that had made him notice her when he'd stopped noticing anyone. I'd like that, she said. Whatever comes next. She got in her car and drove away, and Evan stood in the driveway watching until her taillights disappeared around the corner. Then he went back inside where his daughter was waiting with chocolate smeared on her face and a grin that matched his own. I like her daddy, Lily announced. Can we keep her? Evan laughed, really laughed for the first time in longer than he could remember. Yeah, sweetheart, he said. I think we can. The months that followed were a careful dance of integration, of building something new while respecting what already existed. Nora became a regular presence in their lives, appearing for weekend breakfasts and occasional dinners, and the small moments that accumulated into something larger than any individual event. She learned Lily's routines, her preferences, her particular quirks and sensitivities. She learned when to push and when to pull back, when to offer help, and when to let father and daughter navigate their own dynamics. It wasn't always smooth. There were moments of adjustment, of friction, of the inevitable challenges that arose when established patterns had to expand to accommodate new people. Lily went through a phase of testing, of pushing boundaries to see if Nora would stay. She threw tantrums over minor issues, refused to participate in activities she usually enjoyed, alternated between clingy affection and cold withdrawal. Evan recognized the behavior for what it was, fear disguised as defiance, a 7-year-old's way of determining whether this new person could be trusted with her vulnerability. Nora handled it with patience that Evan found remarkable. She didn't take the rejection, personally didn't withdraw in response to being pushed away. She remained steady, consistent, present, proving through action what she had promised with words that she wasn't going anywhere. Eventually, the testing phase passed. Lily's walls came down piece by piece as Nora demonstrated again and again that she was worthy of trust. The relationship between them developed its own character, separate from Lily's relationship with Evan, a bond that belonged just to the two of them. They had inside jokes he didn't understand. They developed rituals he wasn't part of. They formed a connection that was its own thing, independent and precious, and Evan watched it grow with gratitude he couldn't articulate. She's good for us, he said to Nora one evening after Lily had gone to bed, when they were sitting together on the couch in the living room that felt less empty now than it used to. Both of us. You're good for me, too. Nora leaned against his shoulder. I forgot what it felt like being part of something. Being connected to people who wanted me around. I always want you around. I know, that's the miracle of it. And there were difficult moments too, conversations about the future that required more vulnerability than either of them was fully comfortable with. Nora's career remained uncertain. She wasn't ready to return to nursing, couldn't imagine going back to the floor where Margaret had died, but hadn't found anything else that felt meaningful. The uncertainty bothered her, made her feel adrift, made her wonder sometimes if she was wasting her potential. Evan's own struggles didn't disappear. The maintenance that had defined his life continued, the daily effort of functioning through the fog of grief and anxiety that still descended without warning. He had good days and bad days, and on the bad days, Nora had to navigate his withdrawal, his need for space, his inability to explain what he was feeling because he didn't always understand it himself. But they navigated together. That was the difference. The difficult moments were shared rather than solitary, addressed through conversation, rather than silence, processed together rather than alone. I love you, Evan said one night, the words escaping before he could stop them, before he could calculate whether it was too soon or too much or too risky. They were in the kitchen doing dishes together, the mundane intimacy of domesticity surrounding them. Nora had her hands in soapy water, and she went still at his words, her eyes finding his with an expression he couldn't read. "I love you too," she said. Simply, certainly. Like it was obvious, like it had been true for longer than either of them had acknowledged. Yeah. She smiled that smile that still made his heart race after months of seeing it. "I've loved you for a while. I was just waiting for you to be ready to hear it." "I'm ready. I know you are." She dried her hands and turned to face him fully, and he pulled her close, and they stood there in the kitchen of the small house that had been so empty for so long, holding each other, breathing together, existing in a moment that felt like the beginning of everything. 6 months into their relationship, Sarah sent a letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, unexpected and unannounced, buried among bills and advertisements in the mailbox that Evan checked without much thought. He almost threw it away, assuming it was junk, but then he saw the return address and the handwriting that he hadn't seen in over 4 years, and the world seemed to tilt sideways. He sat on the front steps of his house for a long time, holding the unopened envelope, trying to process the fact of its existence. Sarah had been a ghost for so long, an absence rather than a presence, someone who existed only in memory and in the features of their daughter's face. The idea that she was real, that she was out there somewhere, that she had found the capacity to reach out after years of silence felt impossible to integrate with his understanding of reality. He thought about throwing it away unread. He thought about burning it. He thought about a dozen ways to make it not exist, to pretend it had never arrived, to continue living in the world where Sarah was gone and not coming back. But he couldn't. Whatever the letter contained, he needed to know. Even if it destroyed him, even if it reopened wounds he'd spent years trying to heal, he needed to understand what had driven her to reach out after all this time. He opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages of the same script he remembered from birthday cards and grocery lists, and the notes they used to leave each other around the house when they were young and in love, and had no idea how badly things would eventually go wrong. "Dear Evan, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I need to explain if I can, and apologize, even if it changes nothing. When I left, I was very sick, not just depressed, though I was that too. I was experiencing something the doctors later called a psychotic break, a complete disconnection from reality that made me believe things that weren't true. I believed you and Lily would be better off without me. I believed I was a danger to her, that my presence was toxic, that the kindest thing I could do was disappear before I damaged her beyond repair. I know now that I was wrong. The belief was a symptom of my illness, not a rational assessment of reality. But at the time, it felt more real than anything else. I truly believed I was protecting her by leaving. I spent the first year after I left in and out of hospitals, trying to stabilize, trying to find the right combination of medications and therapy that would make me functional again. I wanted to reach out so many times, wanted to explain, wanted to come home, but I was scared. Scared you wouldn't want me. Scared I would make things worse. Scared that the damage I had done was irreparable. The years since have been a slow process of recovery. I'm better now, more stable than I've been in my entire adult life. I have a small apartment, a routine that keeps me grounded. I attend support groups and see a therapist weekly and take my medication religiously. I'm not writing to ask for another chance. I know I forfeited that right when I left the way I did. I'm writing because I owe you an explanation, an apology, and at least the offer of closure. I'm also writing because I want to know about Lily, not to intrude on her life, not to demand access I haven't earned. Just to know that she's okay, that she's growing up healthy and happy, that she hasn't been too damaged by having a mother who abandoned her. You don't have to respond. You don't owe me anything. But if you're willing, I would be grateful for even a small update. A photograph maybe. Just something to let me know that the most important thing I ever did, being part of bringing her into the world, resulted in something good. I'm sorry, Evan, for everything, for leaving, for the silence, for all the ways I failed you and Lily when you needed me most. I know sorry isn't enough, but it's all I have to offer. Sarah. Evan read the letter 3 times, trying to absorb its contents, trying to reconcile this version of events with the story he had told himself for 4 years. He had imagined many explanations for Sarah's departure. Selfishness, cowardice, a complete lack of love for him and for their daughter. The explanations had been useful, had allowed him to be angry rather than just sad, had given him a narrative that made sense of the senseless. But this was different. This was illness, genuine mental illness that had distorted her perception of reality. This was a woman who had believed in her broken state that she was protecting her daughter by disappearing. This was tragedy rather than villainy, suffering rather than cruelty. He didn't know what to do with this information. Didn't know whether it changed anything, whether it should change anything, whether understanding her motivation made her actions less damaging or more. He called Nora because that was what he did now when things became too much to carry alone. "I need you," he said when she answered. Something happened. She was there within the hour, finding him still on the front steps, the letter clutched in his hand. She sat beside him without speaking, waiting for him to be ready, offering her presence without demanding explanations. He handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her expression shifting as she absorbed the contents. "How do you feel?" she asked when she finished. "I don't know. Everything and nothing. Angry and confused." He ran a hand through his hair. "I spent 4 years hating her, telling myself she was selfish, that she didn't care about us, that she chose to leave. And now it's more complicated." "Yeah, now it's more complicated." They sat together as the afternoon light faded, processing the implications of Sarah's reappearance in their lives. "What do you want to do?" Nora asked eventually. "I don't know. Part of me wants to pretend this never happened. Part of me wants to write back and scream at her for everything she put us through. Part of me," he trailed off. "Part of you what?" "Part of me feels sorry for her for being that sick, for believing she had to leave to protect Lily. That must have been horrible, thinking you were doing the right thing and having it be so completely wrong. Compassion isn't the same as forgiveness." "I know, but it complicates things." "What about Lily? Are you going to tell her?" Evan had been dreading this question because he didn't have an answer. Lily had asked about her mother less frequently as time passed, had seemed to accept that some questions didn't have satisfying answers. But this letter changed things. There was now an explanation, an offer of connection, a possibility that hadn't existed before. "I don't know," he admitted. "She deserves to know the truth, but I don't know if she's ready for it. I don't know if I'm ready for it." Nora took his hand. "You don't have to decide today. You can take time, process, figure out what's right. What if I make the wrong choice? Then you make a different choice later. Parenting isn't about getting everything right. It's about trying your best and adjusting when you need to." Evan leaned against her, drawing strength from her presence. "I'm glad you're here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." And the familiar words, the promise she'd made over and over since the beginning, felt different now. More solid, more certain. A foundation that could support whatever came next. They went inside, eventually made dinner together, maintained the routines that kept their lives stable. Evan put the letter in a drawer, not ready to deal with it, but not willing to destroy it either. He would figure out what to do. He would make a decision about Sarah, about Lily, about how to navigate this new complication in their lives. But not tonight. Tonight he would hold on to what he had: a woman who loved him, a daughter who was thriving a life that was far from perfect, but far better than he had ever expected. The past could wait. The present was enough for now. The decision about Sarah's letter came gradually over weeks of conversation and contemplation. Evan talked to Nora about it almost every day, processing his feelings out loud in a way he had never been able to do when he was alone. She listened without judgment, offered perspectives without pressure, helped him untangle the complicated web of emotions that Sarah's reappearance had created. He also talked to his former therapist, scheduling a few sessions specifically to deal with this new development. Dr. Matthews helped him examine his options, consider the potential consequences of different choices, understand that there was no perfect answer, only different paths with different trade-offs. In the end, he decided to write back, not to forgive Sarah, not to invite her back into their lives, but to acknowledge her letter, to provide the update she had requested, to offer the closure that might help everyone move forward. He spent 3 days composing the response, drafting and revising, trying to find words that were honest without being cruel, clear without being cold. "Sarah, thank you for explaining. I don't know if understanding makes forgiveness easier or harder, but I appreciate knowing the truth after all these years. Lily is doing well. She's 7 now, smart and funny, and more resilient than any child should have to be. She has friends at school, does well in her classes, loves dogs and pancakes in the color purple. She asks about you sometimes, though, less frequently than she used to. I'm not ready to tell her about your letter. Maybe someday when she's older, when she can understand the complexity of mental illness and good intentions that lead to terrible outcomes. For now, I've told her that you were sick, that you had to go away, that it wasn't her fault. I hope that's enough. I'm in a relationship now. Her name is Nora. She's good to Lily and good for me. I thought you should know in case it matters. I don't hate you anymore. I'm not sure I've forgiven you either. But I understand that you were suffering, that you didn't leave because you didn't love us. That understanding doesn't erase the pain, but it helps make sense of it. I'm enclosing a photograph as you requested. It was taken last month at a park near our house. She's healthy and happy and loved. You did one thing right, at least you helped bring her into the world. I wish you well in your recovery. I hope you find the peace you're looking for, Evan. He mailed the letter on a Friday afternoon, dropping it into the blue mailbox outside the post office with a finality that felt both terrifying and freeing. Whatever happened next was out of his control. He had done what he could, offered what he was willing to give, set a boundary that felt sustainable. The rest was up to Sarah and to time and to the unpredictable course of human relationships. He told Lily about the letter in simplified terms, that her mother had written to say she was sorry, that she was sick for a long time but was doing better now, that she loved Lily even though she had to go away. Lily listened with the solemn attention she gave to important matters, asking questions that Evan answered as honestly as he could without overwhelming her. Is she going to come back? I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe someday if everyone wants that. But for now, things stay the same. It's just you and me and Nora. Do I have to see her if she comes back? No, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. If she ever wants to be part of your life again, we'll talk about it together and you'll have a choice. Lily nodded, processing. Okay, can I go play now? Of course, Wididian. She ran off to her room, apparently satisfied with the conversation, resilient in the way children could be when they were surrounded by love and stability. Evan watched her go, marveling at her capacity to absorb difficult information and move forward to hold complexity without being crushed by it. Maybe that was what he was learning too, to hold complexity, to accept that life was messy and painful and beautiful all at once, to stop waiting for things to be perfect and start appreciating them as they were. He had spent years trying to survive. Now finally he was learning to live. And that he thought was the real victory. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of joy. Not the elimination of pain, but the capacity to feel happiness alongside it. Not a life without complications, but a life worth living despite them. He went to find Nora, who was in the kitchen starting dinner. She looked up when he entered, her face breaking into that smile that still made his heart race. Everything okay? Yeah. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her. Everything's okay. They stood there together in the kitchen of the small house that had finally become a home, holding each other while the evening light faded outside. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Next week, next month, next year would bring complications he couldn't predict. But for now, in this moment, everything was okay. And okay, he was learning, was more than enough. Fan tu sa dong tung lai fam thousand tu home. Chung Musun Moi Spring arrived in Columbus with its usual reluctance, winter holding on through March before finally releasing its grip. The snow melted in stages, revealing brown grass beneath, then the first tentative shoots of green. Trees budded along the streets Evan drove every day, and the air lost its bitter edge, carrying instead the promise of warmth to come. The season of renewal felt appropriate for the changes happening in their lives. Nora had begun volunteering at a local hospice, easing herself back into caregiving work at a pace that felt sustainable. She went twice a week, sitting with patients who had no family, offering the same presence she had given Margaret in those final months. The work was hard, emotionally draining, but she came home from each shift with a sense of purpose that had been missing since she left the hospital. It's different this time, she told Evan one evening, curled beside him on the couch while Lily slept upstairs. I'm not trying to save anyone. I'm just being there, holding space, letting them know they're not alone at the end. Is it helping with the grief? Nora considered the question. I don't think grief ever fully goes away. Margaret will always be with me, but the hospice work helps me feel like her death meant something. Like what I learned from losing her can help other people. Evan understood. His own grief had never disappeared, not for his parents, not for the marriage that had ended so abruptly, but it had transformed over time, becoming less sharp, more integrated into who he was. The losses were part of him now, woven into the fabric of his identity, rather than sitting on top of it like wounds that wouldn't heal. His design business had grown in the months since Nora entered his life. He'd taken on larger clients, expanded his portfolio, begun building a reputation that extended beyond the local area. The success felt connected to his improved mental state, to the stability that came from having support from no longer carrying everything alone. He'd even hired a part-time assistant, a recent design school graduate named Marcus, who handled the administrative tasks that Evan had always neglected. The extra help freed up time for the creative work he actually enjoyed and for the family life that had become his priority, because that's what they were now, a family. The word had started appearing naturally in conversation, unforced and unremarkable. "What's our family doing this weekend?" Lily would ask. "Family dinner tonight," Nora would suggest. The label fit in a way that felt earned rather than imposed, the result of months of building something together. Lily had thrived under the new arrangement. Her teachers reported improved focus, better social skills, a confidence that hadn't been present before. She laughed more easily, worried, less visibly moved through the world, like a child who knew she was loved and protected. She still asked about her mother, occasionally processing the information Evan had shared about Sarah's letter at her own pace. But the questions came from curiosity rather than longing, from a desire to understand rather than a hope for reunion. Sarah had become a chapter in Lily's history, significant but not defining. One Saturday morning in early April, the three of them drove to a farmer's market on the outskirts of the city. The weather was perfect, warm enough for light jackets, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to celebrate the season's arrival. Lily ran ahead through the stalls, drawn by the colors and smells and the particular excitement that open-air markets generated in children. Evan and Nora followed at a slower pace, their hands linked, moving through the crowd with the comfortable rhythm of people who had learned to navigate the world together. "She's so happy," Nora observed, watching Lily examine a display of handmade jewelry with focused intensity. "She is. Happiest I've ever seen her." "You too. You're different than when we met. Lighter. Like you're actually resonant instead of just going through the motions." Evan squeezed her hand. "That's because of you." "It's not just me. It's all of it. The therapy you did, the work you put in, the choice you made to let someone in. I just happened to be the person who showed up at the right time. Don't sell yourself short. The right person at the right time is everything." They stopped at a stall selling fresh bread, the aroma warm and yeasty, triggering memories of bakeries from Evan's childhood. He bought a loaf, tucking it under his arm, imagining the toast they would make with it tomorrow morning. "Can I tell you something?" Nora asked as they continued walking. "Always. I've been thinking about the future, about where this is going." Evan felt his pulse quicken, uncertain whether the conversation was heading somewhere wonderful or somewhere difficult. "I'm thinking about it too. I want to be part of this family, officially, not just as someone who shows up for dinners and weekends, but as someone who belongs here, who has a stake in what happens next." Evan stopped walking, turning to face her. Around them, the market continued its busy flow, but he was aware only of her eyes searching his face for a response. "Are you asking me something?" Nora laughed, the sound slightly nervous. "I think I'm asking if you might someday ask me something. If that's where we're heading, because if it is, I want you to know that my answer would be yes." Relief and joy flooded through him. He had been thinking the same thing, had been imagining the same future, but hadn't known how to raise the topic without seeming presumptuous or rushed. "It's definitely where we're heading," he said. "I've been thinking about rings, about timing, about how to do it right. You don't have to do it fancy. You don't have to make a big production. I just want you, whatever form that takes." But Lily should be involved. This affects her too. Of course, she should be part of whatever happens, part of the decision, part of the celebration. Lily chose that moment to come running back, clutching a small, beaded bracelet she had convinced the jewelry vendor to give her for free through some combination of charm and persistence. "Look what I got," the lady said. "It matched my eyes." Evan and Nora exchanged a glance that communicated volumes, a shared understanding that the conversation would continue later, that something significant had just been acknowledged. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Evan said, examining the bracelet with appropriate admiration. "You've got quite the negotiating skills." "What's negotiating?" "It's when you convince someone to give you something you want." Lily grinned. "I'm really good at that." They continued through the market, buying vegetables and cheese and a jar of local honey that Lily insisted they needed, even though they already had 3 jars at home. The morning unfolded with easy happiness, the kind of ordinary joy that Evan had stopped believing was possible in the years after Sarah left. He watched Nora interact with Lily, watched their bond continue to deepen, watched them become something to each other that existed independent of him. Whatever came next, he knew that the foundation was solid, that the family they had built could support the weight of commitment. That night, after Lily was asleep, Evan and Nora sat together on the back porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I meant what I said earlier," Nora told him. "I'm ready, whenever you are. I have something in mind, a plan, but I want to include Lily in it." "Tell me." Evan outlined his idea, the scenario he had been imagining for weeks, the way he wanted to create a moment that would include all 3 of them. Nora listened with growing emotion, her eyes bright in the dim light. "That's perfect," she said when he finished. "Absolutely perfect. So you'll wait. Let me set it up properly." "I'll wait, but don't make me wait too long." Evan pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. 2 weeks, he promised. "I just need 2 weeks." So, Chung Mi Hai Loi Kohon, the proposal happened on a Sunday afternoon in late April at the park where Nora had first met Lily, the place that had become sacred ground in the mythology of their family. Evan had spent the intervening weeks planning every detail, enlisting Lily as a co-conspirator with a solemnity that made her feel important and included. They had shopped for the ring together, Lily offering opinions on which stones were too boring and which were too flashy, until they found one that was just right. They had practiced their roles, Lily rehearsing her part with the dedication of a child preparing for a school play. She knew when to speak, what to say, where to stand. The planning had become a bonding experience for father and daughter, a secret they shared that brought them closer together. The day arrived with perfect weather, as if the universe had decided to cooperate with the momentousness of the occasion. The park was busy but not crowded. Families scattered across the grass, children swarming the playground, the sounds of ordinary happiness filling the spring air. Evan had arranged for them to meet at the same spot where they had gathered for the first meeting, the bench near the duck pond, where Nora had made her promises, and Lily had issued her challenges. The location felt right, a callback to where everything had begun. Nora arrived looking slightly suspicious, having been told only that there was a family outing planned and that she should wear something nice. She wore a sundress the color of sunshine, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Evan felt his heart constrict with love as he watched her approach. "What's going on?" she asked, taking in the scene, Evan standing by the bench, in clothes nicer than his usual attire, Lily vibrating with barely contained excitement, beside him the unusual formality of the arrangement. "We have something to ask you," Evan said. Lily tugged at his sleeve. "It's my turn first, remember." "Right, sorry, go ahead." Lily stepped forward, her face set with the same serious expression she had worn during the initial interrogation almost a year ago. She was holding something behind her back, concealed from Nora's view. "Nora," Lily began, her voice formal and practiced, "you've been coming to our house for a long time now." "That's true. And you've eaten lots of pancakes with us." "Also true. And you never left without saying goodbye, just like you promised." Nora's expression softened, understanding beginning to dawn. "I promised I wouldn't." So, Lily produced the object from behind her back, a piece of paper folded into a card decorated with drawings and stickers, and the elaborate care of a child creating something important. "I made you this because I want you to stay forever. Not just for breakfast. Forever, forever." Nora took the card with trembling hands, opening it to reveal Lily's message, written in careful letters with only a few spelling mistakes. "Will you be my other mom? Check yes or no." Below the question were 2 boxes, one labeled yes and one labeled no, with a small pencil attached to the card by a ribbon. Nora looked up, tears streaming down her face, her voice too choked to speak. You have to check a box, Lily prompted. It's very important. With shaking hands, Nora made a check mark in the yes box, pressing so hard the pencil nearly tore through the paper. She said yes, Lily announced, bouncing with excitement. Daddy, she said yes. Now it's your turn. Evan stepped forward, pulling the ring box from his pocket, lowering himself to one knee on the grass beside the duck pond. Around them, other park visitors had begun to notice what was happening, a small crowd gathering at a respectful distance, drawn by the visible emotion of the scene. Nora, he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. A year ago, I was surviving, going through the motions, waiting for something I didn't even know I was waiting for. Then you sat down at my table and asked to share an electrical outlet, and everything changed. Nora laughed through her tears. That's really how you're going to describe it. That's how it happened, and every day since you've shown me what it means to be brave, to trust again, to let someone in even when you're terrified of being hurt. He opened the ring box, revealing the band they had chosen together, Lily's fingerprints probably still on the velvet from all the time she had checked to make sure it was still there. Lily asked you to be her other mom. I'm asking you to be my wife, to make this family official, to build something together that's stronger than either of us could build alone. Nora dropped to her knees beside him, not waiting for the formal question, already nodding, already saying yes, yes, yes before he could finish speaking. I didn't finish my speech, Evan protested weakly. You can finish it later. Just give me the ring. He slid the ring onto her finger and she pulled him into a kiss that drew applause from the gathered onlookers, strangers celebrating the joy of people they didn't know. Lily inserted herself between them, wrapping her arms around both of their necks, creating a huddle that contained their entire small family. This is the best day ever, she declared. Even better than Pancake Saturday. Even better than Pancake Saturday, Nora asked, her voice teasing, despite the tears. That's high praise. You're family now, for real. That's better than pancakes. And they stayed there for a long moment, the three of them holding each other in the spring sunshine, while ducks paddled across the pond and children played on the playground, and the world continued its ancient rotation around a scene that felt to those at its center like the most important moment in history. The wedding was held in October on the anniversary of Lily's first meeting with Nora at the park. They chose the same location, the same benches and paths and duck pond that had witnessed so many significant moments in their becoming a family. The weather cooperated again, offering a crisp autumn day with golden leaves drifting down like confetti from a sky that seemed to be celebrating with them. The guest list was small, just 40 people, including the regulars from Morning Light, who had watched the relationship develop, colleagues from Evan's design work, nurses from Nora's hospice volunteer group, and the families of Lily's closest friends. Lily served as flower girl, walking down the grass aisle with concentrated seriousness, wearing a purple dress she had chosen herself, scattering petals with methodical precision. She had practiced the walk dozens of times, determined to execute her role perfectly. Evan waited at the front near the duck pond, watching his daughter approach with a pride that threatened to overwhelm him. Behind her came Nora, radiant in a simple white dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, her face glowing with happiness. When she reached him and took his hands, everything else fell away. The guests, the decorations, the careful planning. There was only this moment, this woman, this choice to build a life together. The officiant spoke traditional words about love and commitment, but Evan barely heard them. He was too busy looking at Nora, too busy marveling at the improbable journey that had brought them here. When it came time for vows, he spoke from the heart, abandoning the prepared words he had practiced for something more raw and real. 18 months ago, I walked into a coffee shop because I was trying to do something different. One small change, one break from the pattern of isolation that had defined my life for 4 years. I had no idea that small change would lead here to you, to this moment. His voice caught, but he pushed through. You saw me when I couldn't see myself. You believed in me when I had stopped believing. You love my daughter as your own, proving that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. Every day you choose us, and every day I'll spend the rest of my life choosing you back. Nora's tears fell freely as she spoke her own vows. I spent years building walls because I thought they would keep me safe. I told myself that caring too much was dangerous, that the price of love was more pain than I could bear. Then I met a quiet man with sad eyes who was raising his daughter alone, and something in me recognized something in him. She squeezed his hands. You taught me that vulnerability isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failure, that letting someone in is the bravest thing a person can do. I promise to be brave with you every day for the rest of our lives. The rings were exchanged, simple bands they had chosen together, symbols of the commitment they were making. The officiant pronounced them married, and Evan kissed his wife for the first time, feeling the rightness of it settle over him like a blessing. Lily rushed forward, immediately inserting herself into the embrace. We're a real family now, she announced to the assembled guests, with papers and everything. Laughter rippled through the crowd, the pure joy of a child cutting through the solemnity of the ceremony. The reception that followed was informal, a celebration rather than a production. People ate, danced, shared stories about the couple. Marcus from Evan's office gave a toast that was surprisingly touching. One of Nora's hospice colleagues spoke about the impact she had on patients and families. Dorothy from Morning Light, the purple-haired barista who had witnessed so many of their coffee shop conversations, pulled Evan aside near the end of the evening. I knew you know, she said. That first day Nora sat at your table, I knew something was starting. How could you know? We barely spoke. I've been working that shop for 15 years. You learned to read people. And you two, she smiled. You had the look, like magnets that didn't know yet they were supposed to connect. Thank you for the coffee, for the table, for being part of the story. Thank you for letting me watch it unfold. As the evening wound down, Evan found himself standing at the edge of the celebration, watching Nora dance with Lily, both of them laughing at their own clumsy movements. The sight filled him with something he had stopped believing was possible: uncomplicated happiness. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text from an unknown number. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope you found the happiness you deserve. Sarah Evans stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the old wounds pulse with something that was no longer quite pain. Sarah was out there still thinking of them, still connected in some way to the family she had left behind. The thought no longer carried the charge it once had. She was part of his history, but not part of his present. He deleted the message without responding and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he walked across the grass to where his wife and daughter were dancing, inserted himself into their circle, and let himself be swept up in the joy of this new beginning. The past was behind him. The future was unknown, but the present was perfect, and that was enough. A year after the wedding, Lily asked the question Evan had been anticipating. They were at breakfast pancakes as usual, Nora flipping them at the stove while Evan set the table and Lily supervised from her usual chair. Mom, Lily said, using the word she had adopted naturally in the months since the wedding, do you think we could get a dog now? Nora glanced at Evan, raising an eyebrow. The dog question had continued to arise periodically, but they had always deferred, citing timing or logistics or the need to settle into their new family configuration first. What do you think? Nora asked Evan. He looked at his daughter, at her hopeful expression, at the way she had grown and changed and blossomed in the 2 years since Nora had entered their lives. She was 9 now, responsible and caring and ready, he realized, for the commitment she had been requesting for so long. I think, he said slowly, that it might be time to discuss it. Lily's face lit up. Really, you're not just saying that? We're not just saying that, but it has to be a family decision. We all have to agree on what kind of dog, and we all have to commit to taking care of it. I've been researching, Lily bounced in her chair. I know exactly what kind of dog we should get. A golden retriever like the one Nora had when she was little, because they're friendly and smart and good with kids. Nora brought the pancakes to the table, her eyes suspiciously bright. You want a dog like Buddy? You talk about him all the time, how he used to sleep at the foot of your bed and follow you everywhere. I want a dog like that, one that belongs to our whole family. Evan watched his wife and daughter, these two people who had become the center of his world, and felt a swell of gratitude so intense it almost hurt. This was what life was supposed to be. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of love. Not perfection, but connection. Okay, he said, let's get a dog. Lily shrieked with joy, launching herself from the chair to hug first Nora, then Evan, then both of them together in a tangle of arms and laughter that knocked over the syrup bottle and sent pancakes sliding across the table. None of them cared about the mess. They were too busy being happy. 3 weeks later, they brought home a golden retriever puppy named Sunny, an energetic ball of fur who immediately claimed the house as her territory and the family as her pack. Lily took her responsibilities seriously, walking Sunny every morning before school, filling food and water bowls without being reminded, training her with a patience that surprised Evan with its maturity. Nora bonded with the dog in ways that seemed to heal old wounds, talking to Sunny about Buddy, about Margaret, about all the losses that had shaped her life. The puppy listened with the uncritical attention that dogs offered, loving unconditionally, asking nothing in return. And Evan found himself grateful for the chaos, for the barking and the chewed shoes and the fur that seemed to materialize on every surface. The house was louder now, messier, more alive. It felt like a home in ways it never had when it held only grief and silence. One evening he sat on the back porch watching Sunny chase Lily around the yard, Nora beside him, with her hand in his, the sky streaked with the colors of sunset. "I never thought I could have this," he said quietly. "After Sarah left, after everything, I thought that part of my life was over. I know, I felt the same way after Margaret. But here we are. Here we are." Lily threw a ball and Sunny bounded after it, all awkward puppy limbs in unbridled enthusiasm. Her laughter carried across the yard, pure and unself-conscious, the sound of a child who knew she was safe and loved. "Thank you," Evan said to Nora, "for taking a chance on us, for seeing something worth loving in this mess." Nora leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you for letting me in, for being brave enough to try again. I'm glad I went to that coffee shop. I'm glad I needed an electrical outlet." They sat together as the light faded, watching their daughter play with their dog, feeling the weight of all their shared history and the lightness of their shared future. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges ahead, more complications, more moments when the old fears surfaced and the old wounds ached. That was the nature of life, of love, of choosing to share your existence with other people. But they would face it together. That was the difference. That was everything. Evan Carter had spent years surviving. He had learned to maintain, to function, to show up for the demands of existence without fully participating in its joys. Now finally he was living, and the life he had built, imperfect and precious, was more than he had ever dared to hope for. 3 years passed like water, finding its course, each season flowing into the next, with the quiet inevitability of time. Lily turned 12, then 13, transforming from the earnest little girl who had interrogated Nora about pancakes into a teenager with opinions about everything and the confidence to express them. She still loved purple, still adored Sunny, still rolled her eyes at her father's attempts to be cool, while secretly appreciating his steadiness. But she was becoming her own person now, separate from the child she had been moving toward, the adult she would become. Evan watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and grief that all parents knew. The little girl who had held his hand on morning walks to school now preferred to be dropped off a block away where her friends couldn't see her, emerging from her father's truck. The child who had demanded bedtime stories now retreated to her room with headphones and a phone connected to a world of peers that he could only glimpse from the outside. "She's pulling away," he said to Nora one evening after Lily had declined family movie night in favor of texting with friends. "I knew it would happen eventually, but I wasn't ready." War set aside the book she had been reading. "She's not pulling away. She's growing up. There's a difference." "Is there?" "She still comes to you when something matters. Last week when she was worried about the math test. Last month when that girl said something mean about her hair. She still trusts you with the important things. But the everyday things are how teenagers practice independence. It's healthy. It means you've done your job well." Evan knew she was right, but the knowledge didn't ease the ache. He had spent so many years being Lily's everything, her only parent, her primary source of comfort and guidance. Learning to share that role with Nora had been an adjustment. Learning to step back as Lily needed him less was harder still. But there were compensations. The family they had built was strong now, weathered by time and tested by the ordinary challenges of life together. Nora had returned to nursing, taking a position in a hospice care unit where she could apply everything she had learned from losing Margaret. The work fulfilled her in ways that her previous career hadn't, purposeful without being overwhelming. Evan's design business had flourished, growing from a solo operation to a small agency with 3 employees and a client list that stretched across the Midwest. He still worked from home most days, still prioritized family over profit, but the success gave them options they hadn't had before. A larger house, college savings for Lily, the security that came from knowing they could weather whatever storms might arrive. Sunny had grown from a chaotic puppy into a dignified adult dog, her golden fur now touched with gray around the muzzle. She still followed Lily everywhere, still slept at the foot of her bed, still greeted every family member's return with the unbridled enthusiasm that only dogs could muster. She had become as essential to their household as any human member, the glue that held them together through her simple, uncomplicated love. The years had brought challenges too. Lily struggled with anxiety during her first year of middle school, overwhelmed by the social complexity and academic pressure. Evan recognized the symptoms because he had experienced them himself, and together with Nora, they found her a therapist, gave her tools, supported her through the difficult months until she emerged stronger and more self-aware. There had been health scares. Nora's mother, living in the small town 2 hours south, had suffered a stroke that left her partially paralyzed. They had spent months driving back and forth, helping with rehabilitation, navigating the complicated logistics of caring for an aging parent from a distance. The experience had been exhausting, but had also brought them closer, had demonstrated the strength of their partnership under pressure. Evan's own mental health had required ongoing attention. He still took medication, still practiced the coping strategies Dr. Matthews had taught him, still had days when the old darkness threatened to descend. But the episodes were less frequent now, less severe, more manageable. He had learned to ask or hire help when he needed it, to trust Nora with his struggles, to stop pretending he was fine when he wasn't. The family had settled into rhythms that felt permanent, rituals that defined their shared life. Saturday morning pancakes now prepared by Lily more often than by Evan, her skills having surpassed his somewhere around her 11th birthday. Sunday afternoon walks with Sunny, exploring parks and trails around the city, the four of them moving together through the world. Friday night dinners at restaurants that Lily chose on rotation, her tastes evolving from chicken fingers to sushi to Ethiopian food as she grew more adventurous. And always underlying everything, the love that had started in a coffee shop and grown into something unshakable. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Evan asked Nora one night as they lay in bed listening to the quiet sounds of their sleeping household. "Different how? If I hadn't gone to that coffee shop, if you hadn't needed an outlet, if any of the 1,000 small things that led to us meeting had gone differently." Nora was quiet for a moment. "I try not to think about it. It's too terrifying." Terrifying. The idea that I might have missed this, missed you and Lily, spent my whole life never knowing what I was missing. She rolled to face him, her hand finding his in the darkness. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Maybe not at that coffee shop, maybe not that day, but eventually, because we were supposed to." You believe in fate. I believe in connection, in recognizing something in another person that calls to something in yourself. I saw you across that room and something in me knew, before we ever spoke. Something new. Evan pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her body against his. "I'm glad you sat at my table. I'm glad you let me stay." The second letter from Sarah arrived on Lily's 14th birthday, unexpected and uninvited, disrupting the celebration they had planned. Evan recognized the handwriting, immediately felt the same lurch of complicated emotion that the first letter had provoked years earlier. But this time the envelope was addressed to Lily, not to him, and that changed everything. He stood in the kitchen, holding the envelope, weighing his options. He could throw it away, protect Lily from whatever Sarah had to say, maintain the stability they had built. He could open it himself, screen the contents, decide whether it was appropriate for his daughter to see, or he could give it to her, trust her with this complication, let her make her own choices about how to respond. Lily was 14 now, old enough to understand complexity, old enough to have a relationship with the truth, even when the truth was difficult. He waited until after the birthday dinner, after the cake and the presents and the celebration that Lily deserved. When the festivities had wound down and Nora had taken Sunny for an evening walk, he sat his daughter down in the living room. "There's something I need to give you," he said, "but first we need to talk." Lily's expression shifted from post-birthday contentment to wary attention. "That sounds serious." "It is. A letter came today, from your mother." The words hung in the air between them. Lily's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, something that might have been fear before settling into careful neutrality. My biological mother, Sarah. Yes. She wrote to me, "The envelope has your name on it. I haven't opened it. I wanted to give you the choice." Lily was quiet for a long moment, processing. She had known the basic facts about her mother for years. She had absorbed the explanation Evan had provided after Sarah's first letter. But knowing about someone and receiving direct communication from them were different things. "What do you think it says?" "I don't know. Her first letter, the one she sent me years ago, was an apology, an explanation. Maybe this is something similar." "Do you think I should read it?" The question surprised him. He had expected Lily to either demand the letter immediately or refuse to acknowledge its existence. This middle ground, this request for guidance, reminded him that for all her teenage independence, she still needed him. "I think that's your decision, but I'll support whatever you choose, and I'll be here to talk about it afterward if you want." Lily held out her hand. "Give it to me." He passed her the envelope, watching as she studied her name written in handwriting she had never seen before. She didn't open it immediately, just held it, weighing it in her hands the way Evan had waited in the kitchen. "Will you stay while I read it?" "If you want me to." "I want you to." She opened the envelope, carefully pulling out the folded pages within. Evan sat beside her, close enough to offer support, but not close enough to read over her shoulder, giving her privacy while remaining present. He watched her face as she read, saw the emotions flicker across her features. Surprise, sadness, something that looked like anger, and then unexpectedly, something that looked like peace. When she finished, she folded the letter and set it on the coffee table. She didn't speak for a long moment, and Evan didn't push, letting her process at her own pace. "She wants to meet me," Lily said finally. "Someday when I'm ready." She says she's not asking for a relationship, just a conversation, just a chance to answer any questions I might have. "How do you feel about that?" Lily considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I don't know. Part of me is curious. I've always wondered about her, even when I pretended I didn't. Part of me is angry. She left. She made that choice. Why should I give her anything now?" Both of those feelings make sense. And part of me, Lily hesitated, searching for words. Part of me feels sorry for her. The letter talks about her illness, about how hard her life has been. She sounds lonely. She sounds like someone who made a terrible mistake and has to live with it forever. Evan felt his throat tighten. His daughter's capacity for empathy, even toward the person who had caused her the most fundamental wound, was remarkable. "You don't have to decide anything now. You can take as much time as you need." "I know." Lily picked up the letter again, studying it as though it might reveal additional secrets. I think I want to wait until I'm older, until I've figured out more about who I am. And then maybe if I still want to, I can meet her." "That sounds wise. But I want you to know something, Dad." Lily looked at him directly, her gaze steady and certain. "Whatever happens with her, it doesn't change anything about us. You're my dad, and you're the one who stayed. You're the one who raised me and loved me and showed up every single day. Nothing about Sarah changes that." Evan felt tears prick at his eyes, the same tears that had threatened when Lily was 7 and showed him the shoebox of notes when she was 9, and asked Nora to be her other mom when she walked down the aisle at the wedding, scattering petals with solemn concentration. "I love you, Lily." "I love you too, Dad." She leaned against his shoulder, the gesture both childlike and mature. "Thanks for giving me the letter, for trusting me to handle it. You've earned that trust. Every day you earn it." They sat together until Nora returned with Sunny, until the birthday evening resumed its normal course. The letter remained on the coffee table, a complication that would require further processing, but not an emergency, not a crisis, just another thread in the complicated tapestry of their family's history. Later that night, when Lily had gone to bed and the house was quiet, Evan told Nora about the letter and Lily's response. "She handled it beautifully," Nora said. "Better than most adults would. She's remarkable. I don't know how she got to be so wise. She learned from watching you, how you handled Sarah's first letter, how you've dealt with difficult things. She absorbed all of it." Evan shook his head. "I've made so many mistakes." "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after. And you've always done your best to make things right, to protect her while still respecting her autonomy. That's what she learned." Nora took his hand, the familiar gesture that had become their shorthand for support and connection. Whatever happens with Sarah, we'll handle it together. As a family. I know. That's what makes it okay. 4 years later, Lily graduated from high school. The ceremony took place on a sunny afternoon in late May. The football field transformed into an outdoor auditorium, hundreds of chairs arranged in neat rows before a stage draped in the school colors. Parents fanned themselves with programs, students fidgeted in caps and gowns, and the principal delivered a speech about new beginnings that Evan barely heard. He was too busy watching his daughter. Lily sat in the front section among the honor students who had distinguished themselves academically. She was going to Ohio State in the fall, majoring in psychology, planning to become a therapist who worked with children from difficult backgrounds. The choice felt inevitable, a synthesis of everything she had experienced and everything she had become. Nora sat beside Evan, her hand in his tears already streaming down her face, even though Lily hadn't yet walked across the stage. Sunny, too old now to come to public events, waited at home. But her presence was felt anyway, part of the invisible network of love that surrounded their family. When Lily's name was called, Evan rose to his feet, along with Nora cheering as their daughter walked across the stage to receive her diploma. She turned toward the crowd, found them in the sea of faces, and grinned the same grin she had worn at 7, when she conquered the pancake flip at 9, when she finally got her dog at 14, when she decided she was ready to apply to colleges. The ceremony concluded with the traditional throwing of caps, hundreds of mortarboards flying into the air caught by the wind and scattered across the field like strange birds. Lily found her way through the crowd to where Evan and Nora waited, throwing her arms around both of them simultaneously. I did it. You did it. Evan agreed, his voice thick with emotion. I'm so proud of you. We both are, Nora added, more proud than we can say. The celebration that followed included extended family. Nora's mother, now recovered enough to travel, and various aunts and uncles and cousins who had become part of their expanded network over the years. They gathered at the house that had replaced the small home where Evan had spent so many lonely years, a larger space now filled with the evidence of a life well lived. Photos covered the walls documenting the years: Lily's first day of kindergarten, the wedding, Christmas morning, summer vacations, all the moments that had accumulated into a history. Sunny appeared in many of them, growing from puppy to adult to senior, her golden presence a constant thread through the changing faces of their family. After the guests had left and the house had grown quiet, Evan sat on the back deck with Lily, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Nervous about college, he asked. Terrified, excited, both at the same time. That sounds about right. Lily was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. Dad, can I tell you something? Always. I've been thinking about Sarah, about maybe reaching out to her before I leave. Evan felt the familiar flutter of complicated emotion that Sarah's name always provoked, but it was gentler now, softer, the old wounds having healed into scars that no longer hurt to touch. What made you decide, I'm starting a new chapter, becoming an adult? I think I want to go into it with all the questions answered, or at least asked. Lily turned to look at him. Is that okay? It's your choice. It's always been your choice. I know, but I want your blessing. I don't want to do anything that hurts you. Evan considered the question seriously, examining his feelings with the honesty that years of therapy had taught him. Was there still pain associated with Sarah? Yes. There always would be, but the pain was old now, familiar, manageable. It didn't control him anymore. You have my blessing. Whatever you need to do for yourself, I support it. Lily hugged him, a fierce embrace that communicated more than words could manage. Thank you for everything, for being my dad, for giving me a good life. Thank you for giving me a reason to build one. They sat together as the night deepened, father and daughter, 18 years of shared history stretching behind them, and an unknown future stretching ahead. Whatever came next, college, career, relationships, challenges, they couldn't yet imagine they would face it with the foundation they had built together. Dad, yes, I love you. I know I don't say it as much as I used to. Teenagers are weird about that stuff. But I love you and Nora and this family more than anything. Evan felt tears prick at his eyes for what must have been the 1,000th time in his journey as a father. The tears came easier now, not a sign of weakness, but of depth, of the capacity to feel fully that he had spent so many years suppressing. I love you too, Lily, every day, no matter what. The coffee shop had changed over the years. Morning Light had expanded, taking over the storefront next door, adding more seating and a small kitchen that served breakfast sandwiches and pastries. Dorothy had retired, selling the business to a young couple who maintained the warm atmosphere she had created while adding their own touches. The electrical outlet where Evan had been sitting the day Nora first approached him was still there, still the most sought-after spot during busy mornings. Evan visited less frequently, now his morning routine having evolved as his life had changed. But he still came occasionally on mornings when he wanted to remember, when he wanted to sit in the place where everything had started and marvel at how far he had traveled since. Today was one of those mornings. He was 60 years old, his hair fully gray now, his body carrying the signs of age that accumulated regardless of how well one lived. Nora sat beside him, her own hair silver, her face lined with the evidence of years filled with laughter and tears and everything in between. Lily was 32, married now to a gentleman named Thomas, who adored her mother to a 2-year-old daughter named Margaret, after the woman whose death had led Nora to the coffee shop and to the table where Evan had been sitting. The synchronicity felt right, a closing of circles, a honoring of the connections that had made their family possible. "It's strange being back here," Nora said, looking around at the familiar yet changed space. "I can almost see us that first day. You pretending not to notice me. Me pretending I needed an outlet when really I just wanted an excuse to talk to you. You didn't need the outlet. There were plenty of empty outlets. I chose the one at your table." Evan laughed, the sound coming easily, naturally, the way laughter had come for many years now. "All this time, and I never knew. I have layers, depths you haven't plumbed yet. After 26 years of marriage, I'd hope I'd plumbed most of them. Never all of them. That's what keeps it interesting." They sat together drinking coffee that was still excellent, even under new ownership, watching the morning crowd come and go. Young parents with strollers, students with laptops, couples on dates, single people reading books or scrolling phones or simply sitting with their thoughts. Everyone was in the middle of their own story, Evan reflected. Everyone was carrying burdens and joys that no one else could fully see. The young man hunched over his laptop might be struggling with the same loneliness that had nearly destroyed Evan decades ago. The woman reading by the window might be healing from a loss that had shattered her world. The couple holding hands might be at the beginning of something that would define the rest of their lives. He had been all of those people at different points in his journey, had been broken and healing and beginning and continuing, had learned finally that the story never really ended, that each chapter led to the next, that life was not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. "Do you have any regrets?" Nora asked, as though reading his thoughts. Evan considered the question seriously. There were things he would do differently if he could, mistakes he had made, moments when he had fallen short of who he wanted to be. But regrets. "I regret the years I spent closed off, the time I wasted being afraid when I could have been living. But even those years taught me something, made me appreciate what came after." "What about Sarah? Do you regret how that ended?" "No, I have compassion for her now, understanding, but no regret. She made her choices and I made mine. And my choices led me here to this table with you. I wouldn't change that for anything." Nora reached across the table and took his hand, the gesture as natural after decades as it had been in the beginning. "I love you, Evan Carter." "I love you too, Nora Carter." They finished their coffee and rose to leave, pausing at the door to look back at the space one more time. So many memories contained in these walls. So many turning points and quiet revelations and moments that had seemed ordinary, but turned out to be extraordinary. Outside, the morning was bright and warm, the kind of day that made everything seem possible. They walked to the car together, moving more slowly than they once had, but moving together, always together. Lily was expecting them for lunch, eager to show off Margaret's new words and to share news of her own, a promotion at the counseling center, where she worked helping children navigate the same kinds of difficulties she had once faced. The family would gather around a table, as they had gathered so many times before, and they would eat and talk and laugh and be grateful for what they had built. It had started with a decision. A small choice to do something different, to walk into a coffee shop instead of driving home to an empty house. Such a tiny thing, really. Such an insignificant deviation from routine. But from that tiny thing, everything else had grown. Love and family and purpose and joy. A life that Evan had stopped believing was possible, constructed one day at a time from the wreckage of what had come before. He thought about the man he had been that first morning, sitting alone with his laptop in his sadness, counting seconds to get through each day. That man had been surviving, but not living, had been present, but not participating, had been so afraid of loss that he had stopped allowing himself to love. The man he had become was different. Not perfect, never perfect, but whole, capable of joy and connection and the full range of human experience that required vulnerability and risk. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had taken years of work, of therapy, of choosing every day to be brave even when bravery felt impossible. It had taken Nora appearing at exactly the right moment with exactly the right words. It had taken Lily teaching him that love was worth any risk because the alternative was no life at all. It had taken all of it, every struggle and every triumph, every setback and every breakthrough, to bring him to this moment walking in the sunshine, with his wife's hand in his, on his way to see his daughter and granddaughter, full of gratitude for a life that had exceeded every expectation. "Ready?" Nora asked as they reached the car. Evan looked at her, at this woman who had saved him without knowing she was saving him, who had chosen to sit at his table and change everything. "Ready." They drove toward their family, toward the future, toward whatever came next. And whatever came next, they would face it together. On the morning of his 65th birthday, Evan woke to the smell of pancakes. He lay in bed for a moment, listening to the sounds drifting up from the kitchen. Nora's voice giving instructions. Margaret's high-pitched responses eager to help. The clatter of pans and the sizzle of batter hitting the griddle. The sounds of family, of home, of everything he had built over the decades since that first morning at morning light. He rose and made his way downstairs, finding the kitchen in a state of controlled chaos. Nora was supervising while 7-year-old Margaret stood on a step stool at the stove, wielding a spatula with concentrated determination. Lily watched from the table, her phone ready to capture the moment. Thomas stood by with a fire extinguisher, his expression suggesting he wasn't entirely confident this would end well. "Grandpa?" Margaret spotted him first. "We're making you birthday pancakes. I'm doing the flipping." "I can see that. How's it going?" "I haven't burned anything yet." "That's an excellent start." Evan took his seat at the table, accepting the coffee that Nora pressed into his hands. The scene around him was chaotic and messy and perfect, exactly the kind of morning he had spent so many years believing he would never have. Margaret successfully flipped a pancake, the achievement met with cheers from the assembled audience. She grinned with pride, her expression an echo of Lily at the same age of the generations of love that flowed through this family like water through a river. When the pancakes were finally ready, slightly misshapen, but thoroughly delicious, they gathered around the table 5 people, and the ancient Sonny, who had been replaced by a younger dog named Buddy II, creating the kind of noise and energy that Evan had once fled from, but now treasured. "Speech," Margaret demanded, pounding her small fists on the table. "Grandpa has to make a speech." "I do. It's tradition. Daddy said so." Thomas shrugged apologetically. "I may have oversold the birthday speech tradition." Evan looked around the table at the faces of the people he loved most in the world. His wife of nearly 3 decades, his daughter now a mother herself, his son-in-law who had become a son in every way that mattered, his granddaughter who carried forward the legacy of love and resilience that had been built through so much struggle. "Okay," he said, "a speech." He paused, gathering his thoughts, trying to find words for feelings that had accumulated over a lifetime. 65 years ago, I was born into a world I didn't ask for and didn't understand. I've spent those years trying to figure it out, making mistakes, learning from them, losing people I loved, and finding people I couldn't live without. He looked at Nora, who smiled at him with eyes that still made his heart race after all these years. I spent a lot of those years scared of loss, scared of love, scared that if I let myself care about anything, it would be taken away. For a while, that fear won. I closed myself off, survived instead of lived, maintained instead of grew. He looked at Lily, his daughter, the first person who had taught him that love was worth any risk. But then I learned something. I learned that the fear of losing something is not a good enough reason to never have it. I learned that the pain of connection is worth the joy it brings. I learned that family isn't just the people you're born to, it's the people you choose and who choose you back. He looked at Margaret, the newest member of their family, the future they were all building together. So here's what I want to say on my 65th birthday. Thank you. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for teaching me how to live. Thank you for every pancake, every argument, every ordinary morning, and every extraordinary one. This life, this family is the greatest gift I've ever received. He raised his coffee cup to family, to love, to the courage to try again even when trying is terrifying, and to pancakes, which apparently are the key to everything. To pancakes, Margaret echoed enthusiastically, raising her juice box. They clinked cups and glasses, the sound a small celebration of everything they had built and everything they had yet to build. The morning continued with laughter and conversation and the comfortable chaos of people who belonged to each other. Later, when the dishes were done and Margaret was playing in the backyard with the Tom, Evans stood at the kitchen window watching his family scatter across the grass. Lily was chasing her daughter. Thomas was throwing a ball for Buddy too. Nora was sitting on the porch swing, her face turned up to catch the morning sun. The scene was ordinary, unremarkable. The kind of morning that happened in households across the world that would happen again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. But to Evan, it was everything. He had spent years learning that this was what mattered. Not the dramatic moments, not the turning points, but the ordinary ones. The accumulated weight of 1,000 unremarkable mornings, each one a choice to show up, to participate, to love, and be loved. He had nearly missed it, had nearly spent his entire life closed off, protected, safe, had nearly let fear win. But he hadn't. He had walked into a coffee shop on a gray November morning. He had let a stranger sit at his table. He had taken a risk, and then another, until the risks had become a life. And now, standing at the window on his 65th birthday, watching the family he had built through courage and vulnerability and the simple daily choice to keep trying. Evan Carter felt something he had once believed was impossible. He felt complete. The story wasn't over. There were still chapters to write, challenges, to face joys and sorrows that he couldn't yet imagine. Life would continue its unpredictable course, bringing whatever it brought. But whatever came next, he would face it with the people he loved. That was the only certainty he needed. That was the only ending that mattered. Not an ending at all, really, just another beginning.